Chapter 710. Luo Nan didn't really care about the effects of his disguise right now. His attention was completely drawn away by the professional credit assessment exam. The credit rating system didn't immediately give a result. It just opened a private passage in the dressing room for Luo Nan, indicating that he could leave. At the other end of the passage was an old workshop. The production line inside had already been dismantled. Luo Nan was familiar with the place right now. They were all common testing equipment from the martial arts gym. This was the place to show off his extraordinary power. But Luo Nan's mind was filled with the professional exam results. He didn't have the mood to show off. He just tested his explosive power and displayed a standard that clearly exceeded the limits of ordinary people. This time, the credit system finally responded. The terminal at the entrance of the old workshop displayed, "The credit rating has been completed. Do you want to create a virtual ID?" There were two options. Yes and no. The options were simple, but a large section of explanation popped up when Luo Nan clicked on it. He knew that the problem inside was not simple at all. Choosing yes meant that he had to create a virtual identity on the Vagrant Exchange's internet. Although it had nothing to do with his true identity, it would still leave a trace. He needed to have a certain amount of trust in the Vagrant Exchange's internet. Trust my ass. The reason why he stayed up until midnight was because he didn't want to leave any traces in Spring City. Luo Nan was about to choose no, but wait, if he chose no, he would be completely anonymous. The system would give the exchange an anonymous card for transactions. This was a primitive method to erase the traces brought by information technology. But this would lead to a lower credit rating. His startup capital would be reduced to 5% and he wouldn't be able to enjoy the in-depth services and benefits of the Vagrant Exchange. After leaving the exchange, he would have to start all over again. In other words, if he still chose the credit rating, he would have to go through all the evaluations again. Luo Nan slapped his terminal. Trap. It was definitely a trap. He was not annoyed by the 5%. After all, according to the rules, if he chose to be completely anonymous, he could theoretically obtain this startup capital repeatedly. Compared to the one-time overdraft of creating a virtual identity, the former had more restrictions than the latter. Otherwise, no matter how rich the investor was, he would have to be prepared to spend a lot of money after a dozen or so times. Compared to the startup capital restriction, Luo Nan was really annoyed by the order of the interface. If this option was placed at the forefront of the credit system interface, then Luo Nan and the vast majority of people who needed to conceal their identities would absolutely choose to remain anonymous without the slightest hesitation. They wouldn't care about the services and benefits. However, after the intense and exciting exam, just a little bit of anticipation would be greatly discounted. Later on, they would have to abandon their exam results and start all over again. All right, he was a little reluctant. Luo Nan threw a tantrum at the terminal, but in the end, he was unable to restrain his anticipation towards the real results. He grimaced in pain as he chose yes. His eyes were wide open as he jumped into the trap, but at the same time, he swore to himself, if my identity is exposed because of this, I will sweep this place clean. The terminal bore Luo Nan's small emotions, but it still maintained its calm. The next interface popped up according to the prescribed order. Please set up a virtual identity ID. Luo Nan thought for a bit and chose the two words, smelting furnace. This could be considered a summary of today's operation. Soon, he took out a simple and unadorned metal plate from the designated toolbox. This was his identity nameplate in the U-Hole market. The nameplate had a built-in chip. It could be read and operated on the terminal of the exchange. This money was bound to the virtual identity account. Not only could it be used in the local market, it could be used in the vast majority of vagrant markets around the world. However, this was tantamount to completely entering the credit system of the Vagrant Exchange. That virtual identity possessed more practical significance. There was always a feeling of giving up halfway. Luo Nan curled his lips and forcefully swallowed the fruit of his emotions. He focused his attention on the evaluation results. The terminal read the nameplate's information and displayed it on the display, smelting furnace. Fleshly awakened. Intermediate mechanic. Startup capital of 328 points. 328 points? Was this considered a lot or a little? Just as this thought flashed through Luo Nan's mind, the display screen refreshed once more. Professional technical evaluation, 3609 in the mechanical category, top 40%. Overall evaluation, 60,763, top 50%. Startup capital is C file. Note, if you enter the top 500 in the professional evaluation or the top 5,000 in the overall evaluation, you can change your file to B file. The corresponding startup capital will be refunded. Oh my, there was still a follow-up. Luo Nan blinked his eyes at the display screen. On one hand, he wanted to understand the total scale of the vagrant exchange system and his own position among the professionals. On the other hand, he wanted to gain a deeper understanding of the Burn Money Scout and its tricks. Right now, it seemed that the startup capital itself was quite reliable. This wasn't a one-time deal. There were still upgrades to come. Of course, this was also a method to increase user stickiness. Luo Nan began to comfort himself. Fortunately, he chose to establish a virtual identity. Otherwise, if he followed the standard of 5%, he would be left with less than 20 points. What would he do with it? Buy a midnight snack? It was almost 1:00 in the middle of the night. There were very few people who would mess around at this hour in the black market. There was not a second person who entered the entire time. Luo Nan completed his mental adjustment. He stepped on his electric scooter in a carefree and unhurried manner. He rolled over the spacious asphalt road and passed through the spacious and empty factory area. He arrived at the pier a minute later. This place was still empty. There was only a terminal that could be used to swipe a card for verification. Luo Nan operated according to the rules. A sealed small boat floated up from the water's surface a few seconds later. It immediately opened up its cladding, revealing a narrow cabin that could accommodate 2 people at most. The automatic control system display screen at the bow of the boat lit up, displaying the winding route of travel. This was the transportation tool that led to the U-Haul market. Luo Nan boarded the small boat. The small boat started automatically the moment he sat down. It noiselessly tore through the water's surface and moved forward at a pace that was neither too fast nor too slow. Luo Nan sized up the place with curiosity on the way. Sparse and scattered lighting seeped through the gaps between the densely packed stalagmites above his head. It was hazy and carried chaotic ghostly shadows. Luo Nan could still faintly see the mottled colors on the rocks. The U-Haul market was located in the depths of a typical karst cave. The entire structure was divided into sections. There was a clear downward path after traveling several kilometers along the waterway. The buildings in the city grew more and more sparse, and the topography became more and more complex. A portion of the waterway even needed to be submerged in order to pass through. It was because of this that the small boat had a completely sealed cladding. It also needed to be used as a temporary submarine. The karst cave in front of him grew lower and lower. The falling stalagmites were about to hit his head. Luo Nan simply lay down. His gaze lingered on the stalagmites of all shapes and colors. The sensory network that came out ahead had already mapped the general situation of the area within a radius of 20 kilometers in his mind. There were hundreds of karst caves of all sizes. There were hundreds of thousands of stalagmites. The result of the direct reflection was very chaotic. It was like an enormous maze. Luo Nan closed his eyes for a moment. His cerebral cortex and central nervous system operated at high speeds, endlessly integrating the information received by the sensory network. He used the secret technique of overall planning to increase the efficiency of the processing, gradually stripping away the outer layer of the chaotic and useless baggage to form an even clearer road map. Well, it was still relatively simple. Luo Nan had been carrying out the reconstruction of the structure of his mental senses for the past few months. The source of power came from the depths of the cloud world, the misty labyrinth that made it difficult for him to move forward. The spacetime configuration fragments danced before his eyes all the time like a sandstorm. They were randomly pieced together and combined together. there were even more repulsion and collisions. When faced with the tens of billions of configuration fragments, Luo Nan was unable to grasp the logic of the structure within. He was unable to figure out what kind of laws were there. His soul strength was without a basis. Most mental senses and interference were ineffective. Exploring the mysteries of the depths of the labyrinth was out of the question. Over there, Luo Nan had become blind with his eyes wide open. He could only toss and turn in an area with a radius of a few dozen meters. He slowly piled them up like building blocks, expanding the range. If it weren't for Roy 1, this little walking stick, 100 or 1,000 Luo Nans would have been lost until the end of their lives. Compared to the misty labyrinth in the clouds, the underground karst cave was far too intimate. Luo Nan only used 10 seconds to draw a concise and clear topographic map in his mind. Whether it was the winding and winding waterway or the isolated and fractured topographic structure, everything was clearly reflected on the map. Next up was a matter of supplementing the details. Speaking of which, if he were to make a rubbing copy of this topographic map and sell it, how much money would it fetch? If he wasn't satisfied, would he want a similar high-definition version of the world map? Luo Nan still didn't have a trusting attitude towards the 328 points of starting capital. His mind revolved with business. The AI within the small boat emitted a warning sound while he was pondering. It warned the passengers that they were about to enter the water. The stalactites above their heads had already fallen down piece by piece. Some of the edges had already pierced into the water surface. The small boat's fully enclosed cladding slid and docked, sealing the already narrow cabin even more tightly. They entered the underwater phase. The lights within the cabin lit up and the oxygen supply system began to operate. Overall, it didn't seem stuffy. Luo Nan blinked and looked at the half-worn paint on the cladding. He thought, next time I come here, I must definitely try the entrance outside the city. That place is much more spacious and convenient. However, it was quite interesting to carry out underwater in this manner. He looked at the waterway topographic map that he had sorted out earlier. It seemed that this was the only way to run through the 4 levels of the U-Hole market. There were over 20 large and small black market areas. Luo Nan pulled up the trade app and looked at the relevant explanation. Sure enough, the U-Hole market was ranked at the top of the hundreds of vagrant exchanges in the world. There was a bit of an adventurous flavor to it. Unfortunately, he was the type that had a map-wide hack. Luo Nan burst out in laughter. The sound of laughter hadn't died away when the small boat suddenly shook. It seemed to have collided with something. A muffled vibration came in and the boat's entire body drifted to the side. Then it collided with the uneven stone wall on the side of the river. This time it was clearly heavier and Luo Nan felt dizzy and disoriented from the jolt. Chapter 711. Luo Nan instinctively panicked upon encountering an accident, but he soon calmed down. Basically, the most difficult way for him to die was to be electrocuted to death. The other was to drown to death. Of course, the most miserable way for him to die was to be electrocuted to death or drowned to death. In any case, his mental senses were already focused, and he immediately confirmed that the small boat had encountered a car accident. No, it was a boat accident. The small boat had collided with a stalagmite that had sunk to the bottom of the water. As for why it collided, it was because the stalagmite that had sunk to the bottom of the water had suddenly bounced up when the small boat passed by. The top of the stalagmite had risen, and the small boat's navigation system had made a mistake in its judgment. The small boat was unable to dodge in time. Looking into the cause of the accident, the relatively gentle waterway did not have any strong turbulence in the water. The stalagmite had moved on its own. Could it be that the distortion of the wilderness had caused the stalagmite to become a spirit? Then Luo Nan saw that the front end of the stalagmite and the small boat had already cracked open for some unknown reason. Large amounts of water poured in, and there were flickering electric flames jumping inside. However, the flames were soon extinguished. Luo Nan's mental senses were limited by the precision of his senses. Without the support of special techniques, it was not enough to naturally penetrate the completely sealed opaque barrier. But it was different if a hole was opened. Oh my, this is truly a pleasant surprise. Luo Nan reached out and slapped the cover. Since the outside of the small boat was still underwater, the cover adhered to its own mission under the control of the system. It firmly sealed itself. This was not a problem for Luo Nan. The external neuron poked at the system, and the cover ignored the surging river water and opened on its own. Luo Nan shivered from the shock of the ice-cold river water. However, not a single drop of water seeped in, aside from the transmission of the chill. This was because he had utilized the condensation ring to fully control the water molecules, forming a thin and tough water membrane to protect the effects of his disguise. And so, Luo Nan followed the surging flow of water out of the small boat's cabin. The small boat had already moved forward a few dozen meters crookedly with the flow of water. He still needed to turn back. He hadn't deliberately practiced swimming, but the sensor network built on the foundation of the condensation ring made him very sensitive to the details of the flow of water. Coupled with his outstanding body coordination, he found the feeling after just a few strokes in the water. The water was turbid and dark, but it was as easy as reading lines on his palm. Soon, he came to the side of the damaged stalagmite that was jumping. He gave it a push without any hope at all. Sure enough, even if the inside was hollow, the weight was quite heavy. At the very least, Luo Nan had no way of dragging it away. Luo Nan looked at the glimmer of light that still flickered within the fissure. He said to himself, "It's up to your luck." His soul strength interfered with the external neuron, forming an interference wave that swept across the control system within the stalagmite. A second later, a crack appeared in the middle of the stalagmite. The water that was supposed to rush in was strangely turned back and churned, as if there was an invisible wall that could not be penetrated. It was under these circumstances that the door on the stalagmite was able to break free from the heavy water pressure for a short period of time. It opened normally, and Luo Nan saw the transparent environment inside. He didn't go in. The door was far too small. Even his immature body of a youth would find it hard to squeeze in. With a slight thought, the water that had been blocked outside the door swirled and surged in. It was like an iron wok in the hands of a chef. It performed a unique skill similar to a flipping ladle. It dipped inside the stalagmite, and when it surged out again, it carried a small human body with it. The human body moved at an appropriate angle, avoiding the damage that might come from the door's collision. Perfect. It was just as Luo Nan's mental senses had predicted. This was a child that was at most 5 or 6 years old. He was about the same age as the little bastard from Worker Jai's family. The child's face was already warped with panic and fear due to the series of unforeseen events. But even so, he still opened his eyes wide, doing his best to distinguish the surrounding environment after the series of unforeseen events. He was very different from his peers who closed their eyes and cried for their mothers. "Let's go." Luo Nan grabbed the child by the back of his collar and turned around to chase after the small boat that had been washed several hundred meters away by the current. Then he saw the target that had sunk to the bottom of the river full of water, unable to rise again. This really was a sad story. Luo Nan shook his head and turned to look at the little fellow in his hand. Then he saw the pair of eyes that were doing their best to open wide. The premise for the little fellow to be able to do this was that Luo Nan had already used the condensation ring to filter the water, creating a breathing, aerobic environment. Perhaps the little fellow already felt that there was no need to worry about his survival, but he did his best to look over. His panic and fear began to settle, and his brows were still furrowed. He really did look like a precocious boy. If this wasn't the case, it would have been impossible for him to drive a small submarine disguised as a stalagmite through the waterway. In addition, this child's body, tonight was truly an eventful night. At this time, Luo Nan naturally forgot that he was the one who started everything. He was the legendary instigator of all this. Luo Nan walked forward in the waterway for nearly a kilometer before he finally left this section of the underground waterway. Then he found a relatively flat riverbank and climbed up while carrying the little fellow. Illumination appeared once more here, reflecting the blurry outlines of the surrounding karst cave. The U-Hole market paid more attention to the construction of basic facilities, but no matter how much attention they paid, they couldn't withstand the appearance of accidents. "I'll compensate you." Luo Nan still hadn't thought of how to communicate with the precocious boy in his hand, but the boy took the initiative to express his attitude. Other than his voice being a bit shaky, everything else was quite good. After all, he was soaked in water. He wasn't like Luo Nan. His entire body was dry. It was as if he had swum in a fake waterway. Luo Nan blurted out a sentence, "That small boat isn't mine anyways." Crap. He forgot to change his voice. Also, the moves he made earlier seemed to be all on the mental side. Right when Luo Nan suddenly woke up and was vexed, the precocious boy went, "Oh." Then he actually didn't say anything else. Luo Nan turned his head to look curiously. He saw the little boy turn his head to size up the surroundings. Then he raised his right arm to look at the projected virtual screen. A detailed map of the karst cave's waterway was displayed on the screen. Fine. His plan to sell the map could be scrapped. Luo Nan sighed soundlessly. He deliberately suppressed his voice and said, "Do you know how to get there?" The little boy raised his head to glance at him. "Cave 47 is surrounded by water." Oh. Luo Nan finally understood when he saw the gaze the little boy cast over, so it turns out I'm the one doing it. It was rare for him to meet someone younger than him. Luo Nan wanted to tease the little boy a bit. He imitated the tone of a cold-blooded killer in the movies. In this era, labor costs are the most expensive. Luo Nan's gaze shot towards the little boy's right hand as he spoke. The temperature in Spring City at the end of April wasn't low. The little boy wore a small cashmere glove on his hand. The sleeve of the glove covered his entire right arm tightly. The little fellow was very sensitive. He lowered his raised right arm. Luo Nan felt that he was being a bit rude, so he stopped teasing the little boy. "Forget it. Let's go. Even if you're being kind, you need to finish what you started." He didn't ask the little boy about the map anymore. Even though he didn't know what Cave 47 and Cave 57 were, he had an entire set of water maps of the karst cave terrain in his mind. He was very clear that he just needed to head east and cross a secret underwater passage to enter the cave market. There was a small trading market at the edge of the cave market. It was naturally convenient to go there. He grabbed the little fellow's collar out of habit and prepared to head east. Who knew that the little fellow would struggle, go that way? The little boy used his left hand to point in the direction they came from. "Go back. There's still a long way to go to the market. The return trip is even shorter. Are you bullying me for not having a map?" Luo Nan was amused. He thought about the cause and effect of encountering this little boy and a guest blurted out, "Kid, you didn't run away from home, did you?" "I didn't." The little boy firmly refuted. His round eyes didn't even blink. He had a clear conscience. Hee hee. Luo Nan was just about to expose his lie when his sensory network captured a change in the river. He simply crossed his arms and didn't move. "Then let's wait a bit longer. I have a premonition that the adults of your family will come looking for us soon." The little boy's eyes suddenly flashed. He clearly became nervous. His body still wanted to shrink back, but Luo Nan reached out and grabbed him by the collar. Luo Nan calmly sized up the little boy a few more times after locking him in place. He coughed twice, cleared his throat, and suddenly increased his volume. He shouted with abundant energy, "Hello. Is there anyone here? Help. There's someone trapped here. There's a child among them." The little boy was stupefied the instant Luo Nan shouted. He soon began to struggle violently. But how could he compete with Luo Nan, who already had considerable accomplishments in the fleshly body? Extending his arms and kicking his legs, twisting his waist and shaking his shoulders were of no use. In the end, the little boy couldn't take it anymore. He let loose a torrent of curses. "You idiot. Do you want to die?" Kids these days really weren't cute. Luo Nan touched the hood of the cloak that covered his face. He turned to look at the little boy's flushed face and the fact that he couldn't continue after spitting out the profanity. He couldn't vent his anger and panic, but he didn't get angry from being offended. This showed that Luo Nan had a good personality. Forget it. Luo Nan didn't deny that the little boy and the people on the small boat sailing over from the distant waterway had their emotions suddenly fluctuate after hearing Luo Nan's shout. The color and structure of their emotions had more or less made Luo Nan pay attention to them. However, it was too late to say anything now. The waterway was soon illuminated by bright spotlights. The strong light pushed the shadows of the stalagmites in the water, rocking this isolated karst cave. Far away in the waterway, two small boats that were exactly the same as the ones sunk to the bottom of the waterway. They sailed over from the waterway one after the other. Yep, there was a third one underwater. The small boat was still some distance away from this place, but someone was already shouting on the boat, "Polio, is that you?" No one answered. The person on the boat continued to shout loudly, "Friend over there. Look after the child. We're almost there. You're quite polite." Luo Nan faced the little boy with a smile, still grabbing him by the collar. He really did look after the boy. The little boy glared fiercely at Luo Nan and cursed with a hoarse voice, "You idiot. This cloak and hat is really quite stupid. Oh right, you're called Polio. What's your nickname?" "Idiot." Chapter 7:12. Two small boats approached on the surface of the water. There were a total of 3 people on the boats. The muscular man in the lead didn't wait for the boats to reach the shore. He jumped ashore first. Under the dim light, his skin was dark, his face was full of stubble, and his eyes were shining. This was especially true when he saw Luo Nan carrying the little boy Polio. "Polio, are you okay?" The bearded man expressed his deep concern. Luo Nan deduced from Polio's previous reaction that Polio would spit at him, or at the very least, struggle more fiercely. However, when the bearded man came ashore, the little fellow just hung his head and didn't say a word. Then, the bearded man sized up Luo Nan. He was a bit stunned when he saw Luo Nan's attire. Of course, cloaked men like this were not rare in the U-Hole market. After all, this was the vagrant exchange. Aside from the local authority dogs, there were also some vagrant criminals wanted by the Star Alliance Committee. The most important reason was that there were too many people coming here. They specialized in tricking people. It was best to be able to cover their faces. The bearded man immediately reacted. He grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. He gave Luo Nan a cupped fist salute that was rarely seen in the outside world, but was quite common here. This was to avoid the awkwardness of shaking hands with people like the cloaked man. "Friend, many thanks. This child Polio has been tormenting us quite a bit. Friend, you. My boat sank to the bottom of the water over there. It collided with the little fellow's submarine." "Really? Then I'm really sorry." Clearly, the bearded man knew how Polio had run away from home. His smile was a bit awkward. The little boy still didn't raise his head. He just greeted coldly, "Uncle Luan." The bearded man laughed bitterly. "Polio, it's rare for your mom to go out. She entrusted you to me and your Aunt Fun. Now that your Aunt Fun is sick, you can't be tormenting her." Polio said coldly, "I'm not tormenting her. There's just a problem with the experiment." The bearded man smiled bitterly at Luo Nan. He had the feeling of helplessness and love from an elder. He seemed to be seeking Luo Nan's approval. But Luo Nan's expression couldn't be conveyed under the double cover of the cloak and mask. Well, no matter how stubborn Polio was, the adults of his family had come looking for him. He had to return. Luo Nan, this customer of the exchange who disregarded past enmity and acted bravely for a just cause, obviously needed to be well received. Both sides exchanged names. Luo Nan naturally referred to himself as a smelting furnace. No one here would care. The 2 small boats on the surface carried them back. As there were only 2 seats on each boat, Zhang Luan smiled and said, "I'll squeeze with Polio. Brother Furnace, you take that boat." This was a very normal arrangement, but Luo Nan chuckled. Polio and I are the smallest here. It's most convenient for us to be together. Am I right, Polio? The boy looked up for the first time and only saw the silly hat blocking his line of sight. Half a second later, he nodded slightly as a tacit agreement. Zhang Lu was taken aback for a moment, then he smiled and said, "All right, I won't squeeze with you guys over here. XINZ, take care of the guests." Another small boat sailed over and invited Luo Nan and Polio to board. Standing on the boat was a tall and thin young man. His eyes weren't big, and when he smiled, they became slits. When he saw Polio, he sighed and said, "My little ancestor." Polio didn't pay attention to him at all. The two small boats set off. In the beginning, the young man, XINZ, tried to communicate with Luo Nan and Polio, but the two of them remained silent to the end. They didn't communicate with each other, and the atmosphere soon sank. On the other small boat, Zhang Lu spoke a few words from afar at first, but then he became silent when he saw the situation. Only the faint noise of the small boat's motors could be heard along the way. The atmosphere was quite unbearable for the rest of the journey. As for the small boat that followed them underwater, it didn't follow them back. Instead, it continued to move forward to the waters where the incident happened. It found Luo Nan's overturned vehicle and the submarine disguised as a stalagmite. It circled back and forth a few times, studying them. Luo Nan didn't care too much. He just switched back and forth a few layers of the sensor network. He looked silent, but he wasn't idle at all. He didn't care if other people were having a hard time or not. They traveled along the winding waterway for another 7 or 8 kilometers before the core area of the U-Hole market was finally in sight. Luo Nan extended his head and looked at the chaotic and flickering area. His finger, which had been on Polio's collar, moved inwards and pinched him. "You said it. You're letting me stay at your house tonight." Polio raised his head in surprise, but he was pressed down by Luo Nan. He could only let out a muffled groan as though he was admitting it with a tsundere attitude. On the other side, Zhang Lu smiled. "It's not like we can't even find a place to rest here, Brother Smelter, it's nothing. We can learn from each other if we stay together." This kid built a malfunctioning stone shell. His nostrils are all the way to the top of his skull. If I don't show him my high standards, he'll think that the well is the sky. Zhang Lu asked, "Brother, are you proficient in mechanical design?" "At least I'm a little better than most people." Luo Nan made up a lie. He turned to Polio and said, "We're professionals. Don't forget to ask your mother to give me a discount when we go shopping." The small boat was docked at the dock. Luo Nan grabbed Polio and jumped ashore. Then he chose 2 electric hoverbikes and gave one to Polio. He stretched and said, "After a long day, I need a good sleep." "After a long day, I definitely need to have a good sleep. Only your place is secluded and there are not many people around, besides Polio, Zhang Lu and XINZ, and the others looked at each other in bewilderment. Frequent customer? Why didn't they see it earlier? Zhang Lu and the others could no longer say anything to this cloaked man who was speaking incoherently. Their hearts were filled with bewilderment. XINZ pretended to have a slip of the tongue and asked, "Brother Furnace, did you come to our U-Hole before?" "Oh, sorry." Luo Nan was natural and unrestrained as he said, "He came here a few times, but it was anonymous." XINZ wanted to ask what was the relationship between Luo Nan and Polio. But Luo Nan had already led Polio forward on the hoverbike. He didn't show any signs of hesitation. Polio's mother's shop in the U-Hole market was quite large. It occupied a small karst cave that had been modified. It was located in a remote area, and it took some time to get there. However, Luo Nan led the way the entire time. The journey was smooth, and they didn't take any detours. Zhang Lu and the others were even more confused. They didn't say anything when they reached the shop. They left in a hurry with their heads full of doubts. After they left, Polio stared with wide eyes and asked, "Were you sent by my mother?" "Sorry, you're thinking too much." Luo Nan dispelled the boy's extravagant hopes. He didn't care about Polio's gloomy expression. He sized up the layout of the shop with interest. Just as he had observed through the sensor network, this shop was a repair center that sold mechanical parts. The layout of the shop was quite good, if he ignored the obvious signs of destruction. Luo Nan had long since set his eyes on the hand-assembled, wild-looking heavy-duty SUV behind the display window. He felt that this was simply the arrangement of the heavens. This car is mine. Ah. I'll help you solve your problem. Give this car to me. Polio was indeed a precocious boy, but he couldn't find any logic in his small brain when facing a character like Luo Nan, who defied common sense. He subconsciously raised his right arm to make a gesture of strength, but his expression suddenly changed when he raised his right arm halfway. His entire arm froze in midair. It swayed up and down, but it no longer obeyed his orders. Luo Nan looked over. Polio's face was swollen red. He turned around and ran madly toward the second floor of the shop. But no matter how intense his movements were, his right arm maintained a stiff posture. It was hard to move. Luo Nan didn't follow. He stood in place and frowned. 2 minutes later, there was a bang from upstairs. Something crashed down and rolled on the ground, making an ear-piercing noise. What followed was a series of smaller crashes, one after another. Luo Nan hesitated for a moment, but he still walked upstairs. Polio was half kneeling on the ground in a room on the second floor. There was an empty box in front of him, and there were other parts and sundries on the ground. They were undoubtedly the source of the previous noise. Polio's right arm maintained a stiff posture. His movable left hand pounded the floor again and again without holding back. He was gritting his teeth. His eyes were red and tears were swirling, but he didn't let them fall. Luo Nan couldn't help but be moved by the intense emotions of a 5- or 6-year-old child who was controlling them in a self-mutilating manner. Polio finally noticed Luo Nan at the door. He subconsciously wanted to retract his arm, but he completely lost the ability to control it. He could only let it lie rigidly by his side. He didn't let down the sleeve that he had just rolled up, revealing a large portion of the skeleton with a metallic luster. Polio's red eyes met Luo Nan's hidden eyes behind the mask. He subconsciously wanted to dodge. But he quickly restrained his impulse and roared back with an even more unyielding attitude. What are you looking at? Have you never seen a prosthetic before? Luo Nan didn't speak, and he didn't deliberately avoid anything. Polio saw that he couldn't move Luo Nan, so he didn't waste any more energy. He bit his lips and used his left hand to tidy up the sundries on the floor. It's out of battery, and the backup battery. I lost it. It's not a big deal, I just need to charge it. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a click from somewhere. Immediately after, the lights above his head began to flicker, and the relay protectors began to take effect. The problem was that in less than a second, true darkness rapidly expanded, filling the room, the storefront, and even the surrounding area. Polio was stunned on the spot. He allowed the darkness to swallow him. Only the sound of his intermittent breathing could be heard in the room. Polio's left hand pressed against the sharp edges of the sundries on the floor, allowing the real pain to be transmitted to his brain. It was a stark contrast to his heavy right arm. He forcefully bit his lower lip and controlled his breathing. He didn't want to lose face in front of that mysterious fool. But this darkness was pitch black and didn't allow light to pass through. It was like a thick blanket draped over his body. It was a little warm, like a mother's blanket. It wasn't shameful to cover Dowdu with a blanket. The hot little Dowdu finally rolled down from his eye sockets, and streaks of tears were drawn on his face. Polio didn't forget to maintain his manly dignity. He spoke forcefully so that the fool could hear him clearly. If possible, he wanted to let those unscrupulous creatures hear him. Chapter 713. Who cut off the electricity like it was on fire? About a few hundred meters away from Polio's shop, Zhang Lu's footsteps were so quick that he almost kicked the door open. He growled at the group of people in the hall. There were 7 or 8 people sitting or standing in the hall, and they all looked over in shock. Zhang Luan's face was rough, but he was very scheming. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a wife by his side and still be able to plan today's events. However, the ups and downs of the situation tonight and the successive changes put him under great pressure. It also caused him to have a bellyful of evil fire, which immediately exploded when he was stimulated. Brother, someone came up and tried to explain, but Zhang Luan thought he was the culprit. He glared at him and pushed him in the chest. Are you an idiot? You can't even understand the gravity of the situation. That furnace isn't easy to get along with. Have you ever seen a guy who can roll around in the waterway without a single drop of water on him? Either he's lying, or he has special abilities. He clearly knows that the U-hole is deep, but he still barged in. Do you think people like that can be provoked so easily? The person who tried to explain looked aggrieved. Brother, it was Mr. Wright who ordered it. Mr. Wright? Zhang Luan's temper was blocked, but he quickly gritted his teeth and said, even if it was Mr. Wright, even if it was me, so what? A cold voice interrupted him. A door at the back of the hall opened, and a tall, middle-aged white man walked out, wiping the blood off his hands with a white gauze. Zhang Luan's pupils shrank. He tried to see through Wright's shoulder and the darkness behind the hall to see the situation in the room. His expression was so obvious that everyone in the hall could roughly see what was going on. The tall white man, Wright, threw the blood-stained gauze into the trash can and said coldly, "Don't worry, I left you some dignity. I didn't do anything too excessive. But because of this, your wife was able to show her loyalty and toughness, and didn't reveal any valuable information." Zhang Luan's expression was very ugly. Even if he and his wife parted ways and became enemies. Asking others to interrogate and torture him was undoubtedly a double denial of his dignity and ability. Disregarding everything else, the subordinates in the hall were obviously following Wright's lead. This was also a very natural thing. After all, Brain Demon, Wright was publicly recognized as one of the bloodiest figures in the wilderness. He was rather powerful and had a great reputation. He was just a middle-ranking member of a small order that had rebelled against him. In fact, didn't Zhang Luan himself only make up his mind to rebel after seeing Wright? After thinking for a while, Zhang Luan's anger was almost gone. He could only fight for some face for himself. Mr. Wright, we haven't found any traces of the church's holy relic yet. That bastard is a very important bargaining chip. Now that a cloaked man suddenly jumped out, it's really not suitable to take drastic measures before we figure out his identity and stance. It was already bad enough when we searched the store. If we aggravate the situation and cause a conflict, we won't be able to get any more clues from Wu Jun. Mr. Zhang, I think you have a tendency to exaggerate Wu Jun's and your husband's willpower. Wright's grayish-blue eyes stared straight at him. You have to understand that a person's willpower is just an illusory bubble in front of instinct. People can keep secrets only because the willpower bubble hasn't been burst, or because they've made some cunning coding programs for their thoughts. These methods are not a problem for us. Zhang Luan opened his mouth to say something, but he was interrupted by Li's hand. The reason I agreed to your shoddy plan, other than demanding a perfect result, is that Spring City is currently in a very sensitive period. It's not suitable to make any big movements. But didn't you notice that the cloaked man was playing with you from the beginning to the end? At the same time, he forced himself to add drama. He has a strong desire to show off, even if it's a shameful face. This is a happy offender, a typical troublemaker. With him around, your arrangements against that little bastard are meaningless. Happy offender? You're the A-level felon wanted by the Star Alliance Committee, okay? What do you mean by demanding perfect results? Isn't it because you're the one who can't see the light of day? Zhang Luan tried to remind him. But if we provoke him like this, won't we make a bigger move? Also, we don't know his background. What if he's a super troublesome guy? That depends on luck. Wright smiled. I think you're lucky. If he's a trap left by Wu Jun, and if he's a troublesome strong guy like you said, you'd have been swatted to death like a fly the moment the power went out. Since you're here alive, that person's strength shouldn't be strong enough to break through the situation. For safety's sake, no matter how much stimulation he faces, he'll probably endure it or wait for a chance to escape. Protecting that bastard is the first priority, and we can set up the trap here. If he's not? If he's just a self-righteous idiot who sees injustice, then the reason is right in front of you. He's an outsider who hides his head but shows his tail, and you, Zhang are the temporary guardian of that little pineapple. If there's a conflict, the Exchange and Spring City will undoubtedly stand on your side. Hey, have you forgotten about the grade A wanted criminal? It's hard to say for the Ability User Association in Spring City, but the military system is counting on people like you to provide funds. Zhang swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. From his nickname, it could be seen that the legendary Brain Demon was never a good-tempered person. He could only beat around the bush again. But Boss Wu Jun's relationship with the Exchange and the Ability User Association is very good. If we really provoke those people, things will become very complicated. Don't you still have me? The corner of Leet's mouth split open. In his dark red mouth, the tip of his tongue that was shaking was as long as a blunt needle. What I want to do is work with my children to shut up those disobedient fellows in time and prepare a delicious meal at the same time. The interior of Polio's shop was pitch black, but the precocious Polio didn't shed Lil P. He widened his eyes and looked at the energy bar of his multifunctional mechanical arm that was slowly but visibly increasing. At first, he thought it was an illusion. After all the power sources in his house were useless. Wires, wireless charging, and other devices were meaningless. However, the charging motion under his eyelids was still progressing steadily. He moved the mechanical arm of his right hand slightly. His bionic fingers flexed and stretched, and the various parts of his body were checked. There were no problems. You can move a bit more. As long as I'm here, it's very easy to charge. Pineapple unconsciously grinned. He found it hard to suppress his excitement. Silly, you're too awesome. All right, I'm really quite silly. I ran a marathon and an hour of tests just to help you charge. What was I thinking? Pineapple was slow for a moment before he finally came to a realization. Sorry, you're called Electric Furnace, right? I understand. You deserve to be tormented by others. After accompanying Pineapple through the initial excitement, the little boy's feelings toward Luo Nan were completely different. However, compared to the emotional changes, the process of accumulating electricity seemed to take a long time. Luo Nan's electromagnetic configuration was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. However, he was still unable to change the physical properties of the power source. He still needed to have the necessary time. The topic naturally extended from the mechanical arm to explore the source and cause and effect. Of course, this was a sensitive topic. In the past, Pineapple would have been unwilling to talk about it. But now, his mood was on a roller coaster. He had seen worse situations, so he was more or less desensitized. The continuous injection of electricity washed away the haze in Pineapple's mind. It gave him more courage to talk about everything to his new friend. The little fellow opened the hollow chamber on the upper part of the mechanical arm. Here, this is my arm. In Luo Nan's eyes, Pineapple's right arm, wrist, hand, fingers, and other body structures were all intact. There seemed to be no problems with the deeper bones, joints, muscles, and blood vessels. However, its total length was less than 20 centimeters. Judging from Pineapple's age and height, the length of his arm should be more than half that of a newborn. This was the level of a newborn baby. There was no doubt that this was some sort of developmental deformity. Ever since I was born, this arm has stopped growing. It has been maintained in this state. I have no way of controlling it. It's just an extra section. Faced with this situation, Luo Nan did not know what to say in order to not agitate Pineapple. He could only maintain his silence. The little boy became calmer as he spoke. Mom told me that with the current level of technology, there would definitely be a way. She brought me to see many doctors and made many plans, but she was never satisfied with them. Last year, Mom asked someone to order this mechanical arm for me. She said that it was temporary. Actually, I feel that other than its endurance, everything else is fine. Pineapple pretended to be magnanimous when faced with Luo Nan's gaze. With it, I can do many things that other children can't compare to. Although I wasn't the one who designed the stalagmite, I spent more than 2 months to assemble it based on the blueprints alone. Then it ran aground? Luo Nan regretted it the moment he spoke. Pineapple didn't retort. He just lowered his head and said, "There must be a problem with the shock absorber." I didn't want to cause trouble for Mom. After Aunt Fan sent me a warning signal, I wanted to dive into the water and run away. However, I shouldn't have walked that route. The depth of the water and the width of the water channel are too much for me. It would have been better to hide in the deeper parts of the karst cave. Luo Nan watched a 5 or 6-year-old child seriously review his assembled underwater mechanical vehicle and the route planning problems. Even though Luo Nan wasn't considered an adult, he couldn't help but feel a sense of crisis, as if he was about to be slapped to death on the beach. What was I doing when I was 5 years old? I was probably crying because of my spineless dad. Kids these days, Luo Nan suddenly thought of something when his thoughts reached this point. Where's your dad? Dad? What's that? Is it edible? Chapter 7:14. Polio was young, and he had been tossed and turned for an entire night. His mood had changed drastically, so he unconsciously lay on the floor and fell asleep halfway through the charge. Even though he was fast asleep, he still half-hugged the cold and hard mechanical arm to his chest, using his body temperature to warm it up. This position was not too comfortable, so the little fellow's brows were constantly furrowed. Occasionally, he would even move his body. Luo Nan was not sleepy at all. He sat cross-legged in the darkness, watching the little boy beside him. His mind was still filled with the emotional stirrings that arose from this. There were also chaotic and distracting thoughts from his rhythm and plans that had been completely disrupted. The underground karst cave was quite stuffy, especially after the blackout. The equipment had stopped working, and ventilation was a problem. Luo Nan felt very uncomfortable. Luo Nan grabbed the thick and heavy cloak to give himself a gust of wind. His fingers made contact with his chest as he rose and fell. The sensation was soft with a hint of hardness. His chest swelled up slightly, forming a clear contrast with the surrounding muscles. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment. He immediately recalled that this was the biochemical reactor. The biochemical reactor had been remolded. After his somatic cells were initialized by the arrangement of tinder within the furnace, they were transformed into fully functional stem cells that proliferated and split. In a certain sense, it was already a part of his body. It was his external organ. There would be no difference even if he took it and sliced it. In comparison, the other artificial muscles that were produced by the biochemical reactor were constructed together with the exoskeleton armor. Their structure was based on Luo Nan's stem cells, and they were modulated according to the formula. The structural strength was similar, but it was more suitable for electromagnetic configurations. Reality proved that Luo Nan's physical strength was a bit lacking. At that time, he had used 2 portions of the substrate to create an electromagnetic muscle membrane structure that was far larger than the furnace body. However, when it came to actual combat experiments, he had only created a paradigm before everything was blown to smithereens. Only the biochemical reactor remained. It enjoyed the same safety mechanism as Luo Nan's main body. The biochemical reactor's various functional areas had already been restored, and its volume had increased by a bit. It was embedded in the juncture between his chest and abdomen, like a demonic insect that had pierced into his flesh and bones. Luo Nan used his fingertips to poke and prod at the biochemical reactor. These were all subconscious movements, and he used this opportunity to organize his thoughts. After a moment, he finally had a clear plan, and the inside of the biochemical reactor correspondingly changed. Luo Nan waited for the corresponding functional areas within the reactor to start operating. He extended his hand and touched Polio's deformed and undeveloped arm with his fingertips. He didn't make any other movements, but a collection tube originating from the biochemical reactor did a slight extension. It collected a bit of Polio's skin tissue and stored it in the storage area. This action was almost exactly the same as what Li Wei and Ren Qi had done earlier. However, the two of them were collecting the special secretions of a mutated human. Luo Nan just wanted to collect a bit of pineapple cell tissue for an experiment. He was thinking that the biochemical reactor's tissue regeneration technology was exactly what Polio needed. Luo Nan couldn't be considered a philanthropic person, but since he ran into her, he would obviously help if he could. Unfortunately, after a short period of analysis and experimentation, the virtual brain system gave him a disappointing result. Indeed, the biochemical reactor could rely on the arrangement of the furnace and a special formula to realize the initialization of somatic cells. Through the absorption of energy and nutrients, the cells could undergo rapid fission and multiplication, forming body tissue that was no different from the main body. It could even mutate into a special creation like the electromagnetic muscle membrane structure. However, the premise of all this was the ownership of the biochemical reactor and the control of the tinder. Luo Nan used his unique soul strength mode and the structural characteristics of his body and soul, which were blended into one after his formal awakening, to serve as the foundation for the biochemical reactor's activation and interdependence. Simply speaking, once bound, this night-level, basic colonization-type biochemical reactor could only be used by Luo Nan alone. He could also initialize Polio's cell tissue and reconstruct the tissue structure. However, this was a new product that had absorbed the characteristics of Polio's fleshly body. Luo Nan could use it, but if he transplanted it to Polio, the consequences of rejection, genetic pollution, mutation, and other unpredictable consequences would come one after another. Luo Nan vowed not to give up until the child was tormented to death. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if Luo Nan reformatted the biochemical reactor, erased all traces of himself, and gifted it to Polio. With Polio's current state and the foundation of his body and soul that lacked the support of extraordinary strength, it was impossible for him to realize ignition and activation. The strong always inadvertently possessed something, and vice versa. Luo Nan spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He temporarily gave up on the idea of borrowing the biotech of an unknown civilization to treat polio. Let's return to a more realistic level. That fellow with the vicious nickname was sharpening his blade, preparing to turn him into reserve rations. Brain demon. Who's that? Luo Nan had a good habit of asking his secretary if there was something he couldn't decide on. He once again opened up the closed system network. Now that he had to hide from Sister Yuan, the only person he could consult was Cat Eyes. What brain demon? Cat Eyes answered a few calls before arriving at Gear on the north bank of Acumen College in the middle of the night. She was yawning, wanting to take a nap. She was conserving her energy in preparation to cover for that extremely unreliable boss tomorrow morning. Her favorite place to sleep was naturally the bar counter with alcohol. Therefore, she went to the public activity room on the second floor of the basement. Because she was sleepy and drunk, her brain was a bit sluggish when she heard this unfamiliar name. She paused for a moment before remembering, brain demon? That moronic fugitive who believes in eating his own brain. That's a bit too much information. One moment you don't have money, and the next moment you're a wanted criminal. That's a lot of information, okay? Don't tell me you didn't pass the credit rating. Have you already fallen to the point of capturing wanted criminals to earn money? Cough, how is that possible? Actually, it's like this. Luo Nan had a general understanding of the sequence of events from Polio's narration. Actually, even if he didn't go through Polio, just the intelligence gathering of the mental sensor network was enough to string together a basic chain of events. The framework of the events was very simple. Polio's mother, Boss June, was an important character in a vagrant power. Zhang Lu and Xinz, and the others were members of this power. Zhang Lu An's wife was Aunt Fun, and she was Boss June's confidant. But due to some reason or conflict of interest, Zhang Lu and the others became traitors. They took advantage of Boss June's absence to deal with the problem to raise the flag. Ah no, it was a covert rebellion. Zhang Lu and the others were in a dilemma due to more complicated reasons. They clearly did something, but they didn't dare to go too far. They just wanted to capture Polio and use him as a bargaining chip. This gave Polio the chance to escape, and he met Luo Nan on the way. Luo Nan felt that he had spoken very clearly, but Cat Eyes didn't gain anything other than another round of yawns. Forget it. I shouldn't have had any confidence in your ability to express yourself. No wonder President Ouyang said that if it weren't for your quick sketching skills, the brains of the pitiful people who listened to your lessons would have exploded. I didn't say it clearly. You should be involved in the conflict between the powers of the vagrants of the wilderness. You have to know that the tribes and gangs of the wilderness are as numerous as the hairs on an ox. 3 to 5 people make up a gang. 10 people make up a gang. There are also clans, companies, societies, and orders. Even a sociologist specializing in research wouldn't be able to figure out the twists and turns within. It's normal that you can't say it clearly. If you do, then it must be a misconception. However, if you can't even complete the basics of verbal expression, then it means that you lack a clear understanding of the core of this matter. In the end, you only want to intervene and help because you feel that the child called Polio is pitiful. You also feel that Brain Demon and the others are annoying. Well, you can say it like that. Then it's fine. That's right. I understand what you mean. Huh. This time it was Cat Eyes' turn to be stupefied. What did I say? Isn't it just a simple matter to be solved simply? Don't let your imagination run wild and complicate things. Don't worry, I understand. A fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. I definitely won't repeat the mistake I just made. Cat Eyes pressed her forehead against the bar counter. This bro was letting himself loose outside. Had he even lost his ability to understand? Luo Nan obtained the answer and didn't say anything more. His consciousness shrunk into the depths of the closed system network. Cat Eyes drank too much wine. She had a toothache. She also had a bad premonition. The matter was heading in an unpredictable direction. She suddenly thought of an unverified rumor. Wait a moment. That Brain Demon is a world-renowned master hypnotist. It said that he can control mutants. Moreover, he has close ties with some powerful organization. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lived for so long. Understood. Understood your ass. Cat Eyes thought of the storm that could arise 2,000 kilometers away. She would likely be in a mess if she joined forces with it here. She just wanted to soak her head in a wine jar. Just as her entire body was powerless, she suddenly sensed something. The chair beneath her body spun around, propelling her body to face the person who just entered. Huh? Secretary are you tired of being a secretary? Are you a spy? The person who came in was Yueyin. She was a lone figure, appearing noiselessly in the public activity room. Her expression was solemn. She was serious in speech and manner. She could really scare someone sick in the middle of the night. Good evening, Cat Eyes. There's no need to greet me so formally. Actually, it would have been bad if it was just a little bit closer. Speaking of which, what's the matter? Didn't you just make a call? It's about Mr. Luo. He's not even here. Is there a need to be polite? Yueyin wouldn't change her habits and cultivation just because of a few words from someone else. However, since she was personally here, she didn't beat around the bush. She went straight to the point. Mr. Luo has become quite headstrong recently. You know this. Cat Eyes blinked. The boss is headstrong. Can a secretary complain? Yueyin didn't resist the joking title of secretary. Instead, a faint smile appeared on her solemn face. I haven't been taking advantage of my duties recently. It's mostly because I can't keep up with Mr. Luo's tempo. Hee. What tempo does he have? He's testing the tempo of the world. Chapter 7:15. In Xia City, it was around 4 o'clock in the morning. Some early morning trainers were already on the streets. But at the same time, it was also the time when people were the most tired. For example, Cat Eyes had soaked in alcohol and a pile of vexing matters for most of the night. She also had to deal with Vice President He, who was famous for being shrewd and capable. She felt extremely tired. When a person was tired, they lost their patience, so she didn't want to guess the deeper meaning of He Yuan's words. She only curled her lips and knocked on the table. Get to the point. He Yuan did not mind her attitude. She was no longer as serious as before. She walked to the front of the bar and sat down on the high stool next to Cat Eyes. She casually picked up a cup and played with it. How can there be an important point in the world? Actually, I came here on a whim to find someone to chat with. Cat Eyes raised her eyebrows. Oh my. The problem becomes serious the moment the leader starts chatting. He Yuan laughed again. Cat Eyes, you've been in good shape lately. Which eye of yours sees that I'm not bad? You can call it a judgment. At most, in another month or two, we can see the architect. Cat Eyes blinked her eyes. I'm not the one who wants to ascend. Yes, the growth of supernatural powers is often like natural development. It's just that it doesn't grow from a baby to an adult. Rather, it struggles out of its mother's womb and opens its eyes to see the world. Hee, I know you're talking about someone. Do you want a drink? Seeing He Yuan nod her head, Cat Eyes snapped her fingers. The robot bartender behind the counter woke up from its standby state and concocted cocktails for the two. Amidst the soft sounds of the cup, liquor, soda, and ice cubes colliding, He Yuan's voice also carried a bit of an indistinct meaning. When extraordinary power substantially rises a level, it's almost equivalent to a rebirth. Just like a newborn baby, what he sees and feels is completely different from when he was in his mother's womb. So it's normal to test and adapt. That's right, we need to verify the results. But you must also take note that the baby is only stretching out his soft fingers, while we might be stretching out our deadly blades, and Mr. Luo. The finished cocktail was placed in front of He Yuan. The light blue wine swirled in the saucer-shaped champagne glass, like the transparent seawater near the shore. However, as soon as his fingers exerted force, the wine in the cup turned into a whirlpool, violently rubbing against the walls of the cup. What Mr. Luo found out is a storm that can stir up the world. Cat Eyes let out a whistle. So what if he did? Just because he can control the storm, we have to tie up all his fingers or just chop them off? He Yuan gave a rare shrug. I just believe that there are shortcuts to experience and learning. Words. Some things might as well be said directly. Anyway, I don't really like this boss. If your conditions are right, maybe I'll agree on the spot. Sorry, I don't know. He Yuan took a sip of the light blue wine and immediately let the rim of the cup stop at her lips. She subconsciously bit down on it. This was a very uncharacteristic action of Secretary He, but Cat Eyes found it a bit more pleasing to the eye. There is only a fine line between wanting others to do something and forcing others to do something. I don't think I can grasp the scale of this, so I hope to find more people to help me think about it. And then you found me? Cat Eyes tilted her head to look at her. He Yuan smiled and raised her cup to show her respect. Well, it's my pleasure. Cat Eyes also picked up her own cup. As an unfortunate person who has already been swept away by the storm, do you want to hear the truth from me? Please speak. Cat Eyes drained the cup of strong wine in one gulp. She borrowed the hot and spicy energy that rushed down her throat and into her brain to laugh heartily. Those unfortunate people who are about to be swept away by the storm, welcome. To be swept away by a fellow like Luo Nan, serves you right for being unlucky. Don't forget to thank me. In the end, the laughter from 2,000 kilometers away could not reach Spring City. It was impossible for the living beings here to receive the messages filled with schadenfreude. This was especially true within Zhonglu and store in the U-Hole market. The sounds of discussion in the great hall outside were clamorous. It was necessary to close the door in order to keep the inner room quiet. An unplanned flaw had appeared in the operation. Everyone felt uneasy in their hearts. Compared to the people outside, the people in the bedroom unconsciously stood in a more central position. They played a more important role. Within the entire store, the only person who had lost her freedom was Lady Yen-fun. Right now she was lying on a bed. Her entire body was stiff, and her breathing was weak. She wore only a thin layer of clothing on her body. Many parts of the clothing were dark red and glued together. She looked weak and miserable. In front of the bed, Wright slowly and methodically put on a pair of sterile gloves. I don't like bugs. Their way of thinking is completely different from ours. However, the mutant types of insects are the most abundant in the wilderness. Many functions can be found from their bodies. For example, the one that will appear next. I call it the treasure bug. It can secrete many kinds of pheromones. It doesn't matter what effect these pheromones have within its race. We only need to be concerned about what kind of effect it will have on the state of the human body and mind. Wright put on the gloves and his 10 fingers flexed a few times. He was like a strict doctor. Next, he extended his hand and very gently supported Yen-fun's cheeks, helping her straighten out her position. All pheromones are very direct things. They evoke the target's emotions and instincts of desire. I don't need to hide it. The research of pheromones in the world today is mainly focused on the aspect of sexual instincts. The results obtained from this are also the greatest. After all, they can radiate many levels of the human body and mind. The higher the level of the animal, the wider the range of radiation. The effects are also more interesting. Yen-fun wasn't a little girl who didn't understand the ways of the world. Her mind was also very clear, and she immediately captured the key words and sensitive words in Wright's mouth. She instinctively struggled, but her body that had been injected with neurotoxin was already completely out of control. Even her head was supported, and she was unable to move. Her eye sockets subconsciously dilated, and her eyeballs swayed back and forth as she tried to find another key figure, her husband, Zhang Luan. At this moment, Zhang Luan was pursing his lips and holding a cigarette but in his hand. He stood at the farthest end of the extension cord at the end of the bed, leaning against the chest of drawers behind him. This was a position that Yen-fun absolutely couldn't see at the moment, and with Wright blocking in front, he could also avoid most scenes that he didn't want to see. However, the electronic photo frame propped up on the chest of drawers was still playing a collection of photos belonging to the husband and wife. This made Zhang Luan very irritated, and he turned his elbow back to press it flat against the surface of the cabinet. Wright was a demon that could read people's minds. It was as if he was speaking to Yen-fun from the tip of her heart. I want to thank your husband. Previously, out of politeness, I had deliberately avoided similar interrogation methods, but now we have coordinated and reached a consensus. Of course, I will maintain the most basic respect for a tough woman like you, Ms. Yen-fun. I also ask you not to wear colored glasses to view the use of sex pheromones. It is only a key to open the door of your instinctive desires. You will experience a process from tension to relaxation. In fact, I hope that the frequency of your brain waves can rush up to 20 Hz, and then gradually fall back to 8 Hz and below. This will cause you to experience great ups and downs, but it will also allow you to freely let your thoughts fly. Through the connections of various desires and synesthesia, you will slowly dig out those things that you love the most, need the most, hate the most, and fear the most. Yen-fun's body trembled uncontrollably. On the one hand, it was because of the strange tone and content of Wright's deliberately lengthened and lowered voice. On the other hand, it was because Wright had already started to undo her shirt, exposing the skin of her chest to full contact with the oppressive air in the room. The restless and almost explosive feeling of humiliation agitated her body and mind, and it also caused the sensitive area of her chest to produce an uncontrollable physiological reaction. Very good, Ms. Yen-fun, you are also secreting sex pheromones. You don't need to pay attention to what this means for the treasure bug. You only need to understand that it is also very sensitive to this kind of information and has a series of corresponding behaviors. Here it comes. Wright withdrew his right hand and quickly spread it out like a magic trick. He gradually lowered it to ensure that Yen-fun could see the bug that had just crawled out of his cuff. The treasure bug in his mouth was flat, like a fat leaf, and was even better than a live bug. Its entire body was iron gray, and it covered almost half of Wright's palm. This guy is a bit big, especially after it drilled into the subcutaneous tissue. The problem is a bit more serious. But I can guarantee that when the time comes, you will definitely forget about this little thing. The pleasure and pain you will feel will be far more than what it will bring you. Yen-Fen lay on her back on the bed, her fully exposed chest uncontrollably rising and falling, and her fit and beautiful curves were even more thoroughly revealed. This caused Wright to temporarily jump out of the role of interrogator. He turned his head and praised Zhang Luan. "You have a good eye." Zhang Luan's entire face twitched. He lowered his head and smoked, not saying a word. Compared to the current humiliation, he was more worried about the treatment and corresponding respect that the new power would give him. However, at least from Wright's side, he couldn't see anything. On the contrary, because of this interrogation, XINZ and the others downstairs would probably be at odds with him. Why was it completely different from what he had expected? On the bed, Yen-Fen's body suddenly trembled greatly. This was already the limit of her current physical state. The treasure bug was penetrating the skin of her chest and slowly seeping down, causing a continuous painful stimulation. Wright had described the pain as insignificant, but this was clearly not the case. Even though Yen-Fen's nervous system was already numb and she could barely speak a complete sentence, she still couldn't help but moan and vaguely curse at this moment. Wright smiled as he looked at all this and explained, "The treasure bug will penetrate your subcutaneous tissue and slowly move to the spine, where it will deeply fuse with your nervous system and become a special gland. Of course, I can do this from the beginning, but this process isn't meaningless. On the one hand, the treasure bug can collect and adapt to the various hormones secreted by your body during this process. On the other hand, it can also make it easier for you to enter an extreme state." "Very good, you're on the right path." Chapter 716. Wright didn't react to the sudden knock on the door, but Zhang Luan was startled. He raised his voice, "Who is it?" "Brethren," the voice outside was Zhang Luan's number one subordinate, XINZ. At this time, Yen-Fen on the bed seemed to be moaning and cursing a notch higher. Zhang Luan's face was inexplicably hot, and he shouted back in a rough voice, "What are you shouting for? Don't you see I'm interrogating you?" He emphasized the word "I," but his raised voice caused Wright to glance at him with dissatisfaction. "Maybe I shouldn't let non-professionals in." The corner of Zhang Luan's eyes twitched again. After Wright finished speaking, he only showed him the back of his head. Zhang Luan threw away the cigarette butt, adjusted his breathing, and walked over to open the door. During the process, he subconsciously tilted his head. Because his body had shifted, there was no longer light to block him. He saw his wife wriggling on the bed, and the extent of her muscles twitching was far greater than this, so much so that the open wounds left by the torture earlier burst open one after another, once again oozing blood. Zhang Luan hurriedly turned his head again, and heard Wright continue to speak to Yen-Fen. It sounded gentle, but it was chilling. "Very good, this level is just right. My professional tells me that the activity in your cerebral cortex is very intense, and they are emitting tens of times more information than normal. I believe that the secret door in your heart is now open to me." His footsteps quickened, and Zhang Luan finally touched the doorknob. He pulled the door open with a lot of strength, but it only opened a big gap. At the same time, he used his strong body to block the gap. He stared at XINZ, and said in a strict tone, "What's going on?" XINZ's expression was also quite serious. "Brethren, I just looked at the electricity meter monitor. The blackout area is obviously still running electricity. Should we take another look? Are you sure it's in Wu Jun's shop? How's the electricity consumption?" "It's not that big." Zhang Luan was indeed listening to XINZ, but his current brain circuit was obviously not suitable for in-depth analysis. Wright's slow voice in the room was like a knife repeatedly grinding on his ear mold. "I don't mind telling you another little piece of information. In your current state, the taste of brain juice is not good. There's too much seasoning in it, so I'll give you a chance to digest it. What you need to do is to strive for a small chance of survival during this period of time. You should do your best to obey me, please me, and tell me everything you know. Of course, you should also trust me, and believe that this little fellow is a very sensitive control center, and can almost perfectly repeat all of my commands. Why did you say almost? This was because the orders given to it would occasionally conflict with its instincts. So try not to beg for mercy when you reach the edge of the cliff. Who knows what accident might happen then? At this moment, Zhang Lu was already doing his best to keep his expression from collapsing. He could no longer look into Xinz's eyes. He just wanted to find a reason to get rid of him. You guys go ahead and scout. We'll talk when you get back. Yan Fun, who was lying on the bed, let out a sharp scream as soon as the *T reason came out of his mouth. Zhang Lu's hand shook, and he almost pulled the door handle off. He slammed the door back, and it almost hit the tip of Xinz's nose. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop the sound from reaching the hall outside. There was no doubt that Zhang Lu's old face had been completely thrown into the mud. When he turned around, Zhang Lu's head was even a little dizzy. Wright was still there, muttering, "Madam Yan Fun, you should maintain your strength. This is a very long process. I've seen too many people waste all their physical strength and energy before they have a mental breakdown, resulting in complete loss of control of their body functions. Not to mention the fact that it's not good for your life and health. The hygiene problems that come with it can also be a headache. The treasure bug can induce but not directly control the target's nerve center. This is more or less a flaw. Right, you pervert. You keep nagging, can't you say something meaningful?" Zhang Lu was roaring in his heart when a different voice poured into his ear. Then why not use the Vulcan ant? Not only can it achieve basic desire induction through pheromones, but it can also directly mobilize the neural network to achieve precise control. I think it's much more reliable than this treasure bug that you've been bragging about. Well said. This was Zhang Lu's first reaction, but in the next moment, his mind suddenly went blank. It was also at this time that the door that had just been closed directly bounced open. The heavy solid wood door fiercely slammed into his face, causing him to see stars. His nose and mouth were full of a hot and fishy smell. Ah! Zhang Lu let out a short cry of alarm, his body staggering backwards. The room door bounced back from his face, but it was quickly pushed open again. Accompanying it was Xinz's long and thin body. His number one subordinate had his back to the door and collapsed, his eyes rolling back and forth. He was already unconscious. The person who had orchestrated all of this stood at the door in a heavy cloak. He knocked twice on the solid wood door that had been tossed and turned back to show his politeness. Under the double concealment of the hood and mask, the person's eyes were still bright and sharp. He directly passed through the battered and exhausted Zhang Lu and looked at the bed, then back and forth between Wright and Yan Fun. "This really is a professional question," on the side of the bed, Wright muttered softly, as if he was praising and sighing to himself. He spoke slowly, but his movements were as fast as lightning. When the door smashed into Zhang Lu's face, he immediately grabbed Yan Fun's throat, realizing the best use of resources. Then, he turned half his body and looked directly at the cloaked man by the door. He formally greeted him, "Aren't you going to introduce yourself?" His series of actions and reactions were perfect and calm. The only flaw was that it happened to coincide with Zhang Lu's roar, which was filled with blood and mucus. "Furnace, how did you get in?" Luo Nan, who was under the cloak, turned his body to let Zhang Lu see his subordinates lying in disorder in the hall. "Is there any use in saying all this nonsense?" "Oh, I can explain the specific reason. I'm interested in Polio's mother's shop. Oh, you should call her boss June. I'm interested in the off-road vehicle in her shop and want to swipe my card to buy it. However, I heard from Polio that the swipe terminal in the shop is temporarily managed by Aunt Fun, who is your wife. I'm in a hurry, so I came directly. I came in a hurry without any prior notice. I'm really sorry. It's just like the blackout in your market. It's easy for people to learn bad things. Was it because of the blackout? A ridiculous idea flashed through Zhang Luo'an's mind. In fact, the most logical action for him now was to make a move. However, when he saw his subordinates lying on the ground in the hall and thought about the few seconds of criminal time between him closing the door and being slammed in the face by the door, his courage to make a move unknowingly disappeared like a bubble. Then, he saw the cloaked man opposite him sway. He was here. Zhang Luo'an was nearly 1.9 meters tall and was at least a head taller than the cloaked man. However, he didn't have the courage to stand in front of the cloaked man. He could only retreat awkwardly. However, he didn't control his direction well and knocked into the chest of drawers that he was leaning against. His back also knocked into a protruding corner of the electronic photo frame, causing it to fall to the ground. Why would Zhang Luo'an care about such details? He hurriedly adjusted his balance and turned around with small steps. He passed through the passageway between the chest of drawers and the couch and arrived at the other side of the couch. Now, he had the double cover of the couch and right. As for what he had stepped on and broken, it was completely out of his range of attention. But after he finished a series of actions, he discovered that he wasn't in the other's range of attention at all. The fluttering cloak was merely an effect of the furnace, taking out the card terminal. This person had really brought the terminal from Wu Jun's shop. He held it in his hand and shook it a few times. He was still leaning against the door, his gaze returning to the direction of the couch. Yan Fun, who was suffering from the piercing torment of the treasure bug, clenched her teeth again. At the same time, she tried hard to turn her head, hoping to see the person who had brought such a huge change at the door. Even if she couldn't do it, she had to use some method to remind the other of the great danger hiding in a certain corner of the room. However, her throat was tightly clasped by right. The back and forth friction between her laryngeal bone and laryngeal canal blocked her breathing passages and blood vessels, making her consciousness even more fuzzy. In a daze, she heard Wright's low, hoarse laughter. Card payment? Looks like you have an impatient temper. How much is that car? There was no response from inside the room. Wright was displeased. I'm asking you, Zhang Luo'an. How much is that off-road vehicle? Zhang Luo'an had already been reduced to a mouse in the bellows. He was completely unable to keep up with the tempo of these two people. He could only rely on his instincts to speak. I think it's 3,000 transaction points. Pineapple said to give me a 10% discount to express his gratitude. Wright sighed in admiration. What a forthright child. Then it's 300 points. Just give it to him. But... How could Zhang Luo'an be willing to step forward and throw his life away? He still wanted to resist, but Wright tilted his body to the side. His ice-cold and emotionless gray-blue eyes cut over, letting Zhang Luo'an understand that if he dared to say the word no, the next one to lie down as a corpse would be him. Zhang Luo'an moved out step by step. His speed was touching. Wright didn't pay any more attention to him. He turned around to face Luo'an. We can properly discuss the problem of the control center. You mentioned the Vulcan ant just now. It really was a very professional suggestion. Frankly speaking, the laboratory here has indeed done a few experiments. However, this sort of social species suffers too many interference and influences from the social model. The ant queen is also a huge problem. Luo'an tossed the swipe card terminal and responded lazily, worker ants and soldier ants are indeed like this. Then we'll just directly control the ant queen. I've heard that Brain Demon Wright is a top-notch master hypnotist. I look forward to your performance. Chapter 717. There was no need for Luo'an to answer meaningless questions. As for Wright, his gaze spun a few times on the cloak outside. His soul strength attempted to penetrate on the mental plane. But Luo'an was certain when he changed clothes. There really weren't many people in this world who could break through his cage and pry into his foundation. Not even the infamous brain demon of the wilderness could do it. On the other hand, Luo Nan sized up Right a few times from head to toe. He more or less figured out this person's foundation. If one were to refer to the society's conventional four-dimensional measurement standard, then Wright's soul strength had a very ordinary level in the first two of the four indicators of depth, intensity, sensitivity, and affinity. Many people propose to change depth to degrees of freedom ever since Luo Nan proposed the cage theory. This was the level of just touching upon the abyss region. Intensity was basically the average level. His accumulation couldn't be said to be robust. But in terms of sensitivity, it was very lively and nimble. Though it wasn't as free as Luo Nan's pure observation mode, the corresponding affinity region was a domain of electromagnetic waves that was several tens of hertz and below. There were rich switching variations. And this was precisely the active range of human brainwaves. The mental activities of quite a few animals and mutants could also be included in this domain. Looking at Yen Fen's specific case, it was just as Cat Eyes had given him. This wanted criminal was a master hypnotist. His techniques were skilled. If he hadn't arrived in time, Yen Fen would have long since been brought into a situation of extreme fear and despair. Her mind would have collapsed. That was all. Luo Nan evaluated Wright's strength as B, in his mind. This person was able to control people's minds and hypnotize living beings. He could do many inconceivable things, but he didn't seem to be the type who excelled in combat. Speaking of which, Wright's posture was really quite stylish. Was he a frog in a well? Or did he have something to rely on? On the other side, Wright muttered to himself for a bit after several fruitless probing attempts. The smile on his face grew lively once more. He appeared to be more interested in the topic of the Vulcan ant. He made a further discussion, this, Mr. Furness. I believe that your following statement needs to be discussed. In the Vulcan ant society, the queen is a pure leader. Her specific functions can't compare to her people. And the pheromone secretion of the Vulcan ant individual can't compare to that of the myriad treasures bug. Luo Nan answered straightforwardly, one is one. One is a nest. Of course, he couldn't do it like the treasure bug, but wouldn't it be better to use the ant queen as a remote control? Multiple connections, group control, just like a normal Vulcan ant nest. This idea is very interesting. However, I hope that there are more solid steps. Wright was somewhat disappointed. No matter how beautiful the proposal was, it could only be described as bragging if there was no substantive entry point. In that case, there was nothing to talk about. His eyes slanted to the other side. It was said that a certain person looked tall and strong, but when he walked, he couldn't even be compared to an old lady with bound feet. Was it going to take until tomorrow to finish? Being penetrated by Wright's ice-cold gaze a second time, Zhang Liuan truly felt as if there was a blade on his back. His feet instinctively sped up, and then he arrived. Zhang Liuan's nostrils started to ache again when he reached the very close standard again. In fact, half of his face was still smeared with blood. He didn't even need to look in the mirror to know that he must be in a very sorry state. He didn't have any idea what was going on. He floated around, his voice trembling slightly, Furnace Elder. Sir. Can I operate the card terminal? Of course. Luo Nan extended his hand and handed the terminal over. He waited for Zhang Liuan to take it, then he suddenly laughed. Polio is so straightforward. You're his temporary guardian, so you shouldn't fall behind. How about you give me a discount as well? Huh. Okay. Actually, the transaction points I obtained from my credit rating are only 328 points. It's quite painful to have them deducted all at once. It wouldn't be a problem if it was just a fraction. How about 28? I'll continue with the discount. Zhang Liuan revealed an awkward and helpless smile. He was completely confused by Luo Nan's words. Next, he could only stare blankly at Luo Nan as he took out the metal card representing the transaction voucher and lightly pasted it onto the card terminal. So it's like this. That's right. Wait a moment. Zhang Lu and finally remembered the basic operation, but at this stage, he only had this bit of instinct left. He completely followed Luo Nan's instructions and entered the insincere number 28. A beep rang out, and the card terminal was successfully swiped. Zhang Lu and subconsciously glanced at the display screen. The basic information related to the furnace was displayed on it. It was also the basic proof for completing transactions and employment in the various vagrant exchanges such as the U-Hole Market, Fleshly Side, Mechanical Design and Assembly. Zhang Lu and didn't know why he blurted out these words. Behind him, Wright let out a laugh. What a dog's hit system. I heard that it was invented by the leader of your Xia Luo order. Oh my, he's also a dog's hit character. Wright's reaction was quite big, and Zhang Lu An's face twitched. He suddenly understood why Wright insisted on letting him swipe the card. Wright was clearly collecting information on the furnace to make a judgment. The problem was that from Wright's perspective, the answer he obtained was just like the money being swiped in. There was no sincerity to speak of. There's no fleshly side that can knock down 10 people in an instant, and at the same time, be able to completely block out the changes in the surrounding atmosphere. So, dogs hit fleshly side. This Mr. Furnace is only a mental side. Nonsense, I can guess it too. Zhang Lu and silently cursed, and Luo Nan's line of sight followed Wright's explanation at this time. He turned to look at Zhang Lu's side. Zhang Lu and instinctively revealed the hearty smile he normally wore when socializing. But his current state of mind could only seriously deform his facial expression. Even he himself felt embarrassed. Zhang Lu and Wright's deep and low voice suddenly came from behind him. Zhang Lu and subconsciously quivered. He wanted to turn his head, but his mind suddenly went blank. Wright's words from just now reappeared in his mind. Bullshit fleshly side. It can only be the mental side. Hold on, the mental side. This fellow is a mental side. Then his close combat ability should be quite weak. Also, I'm a genuine fleshly side, and my combat ability is top-notch. Now that the distance is within reach, isn't this a great opportunity? And at this time, he saw the gaze of the furnace shift in Wright's direction. Just as it was about to turn, this was the best opportunity. A sure hit strike. The high-speed flow of thoughts instantly pieced together into a seemingly reliable chain. It was like some sort of transmission device that spurred Zhang Lu An's body, including the courage and gamble that were suppressed in the deepest depths of his heart. Zhang Lu An's mind heated up. He stamped his feet, lifted his hips, twisted his waist, and threw a punch. He borrowed the good position of standing sideways next to the furnace to unleash a left swing fist, biting towards his target's waist and kidneys like a poisonous dragon. With the current distance between the two, Zhang Lu's fist had just exerted force when the tip of his fist had already reached the edge of the cloak. Then the fist drilled inexorably inside. It hit. Zhang Lu and could already feel the side muscles of his opponent's waist from the feedback of his fist. He seized the opportunity to twist his fist. He wanted to use all of his strength to smash his opponent's internal organs into mush. But in that moment, his twisting fist only tossed and turned in the empty air behind the cloak. At the same time, a figure flashed before his eyes. Just by relying on the instincts of a fighter, Luo Nan was able to determine that his opponent's feet should be a cross step. Luo Nan went against the direction of his fist and made a graceful dodge. An expert. This thought jumped out in Zhang Lu An's mind, but he was unable to correct his instinctive driving force. He could only follow the predetermined path of judgment. I can't let the distance between me and the spirit. This thought was so strong that Zhang Lu An's mind exploded with a bang. He completely lost his follow-up plan. Instead, with an absolutely unorthodox movement, his body lunged forward. His other arm also stretched out and forcefully wrapped around the furnace's waist and abdomen. Even if he couldn't hug it, he had to grab the furnace's cloak. He had to restrict this person's movements. As for what to do after that, it was completely out of Zhang Lu An's consideration. Perhaps Zhang Lu An's unorthodox movement had some unexpected results. In the next instant, he really did manage to grab the middle of the cloak. Both of their figures froze. Next. What should I do next? Zhang Luan was suddenly stunned. He completely didn't understand how the situation had turned out this way. It was also at this moment that Wright, who had been speaking in a low and drawn-out tone, suddenly let out a sharp whistle. At the side of the room, a layer of blurry stone powder and water mist suddenly splashed out from the stone wall structure that was originally part of the natural karst cave, blurring people's vision. A ferocious flat head the size of half a human passed through the side of the stone wall. Wrapped in a misty water mist, it opened its bloody mouth that was similar to a crocodile's, biting towards the direction where Lei Lin and the furnace were entangled. Giant salamander, the pet of the brain demon. Zhang Luan still remembered that it was this monster that had seriously injured and subdued the skilled Yan Fen in the blink of an eye when he had jumped back. Its strength was extremely strong. And now this cooperation was also seamless. Wait, I'm also in the attack range. Zhang Luan suddenly sobered up. His mind was even more agile than usual. In an instant, he understood the role he had played in this series of actions. Even the reason why he was so fearless was also clear and obvious. He screamed, "Right, you!" What followed was an even sharper hissing sound. Zhang Luan felt his body float up, and then he was thrown out by a terrifying force. And the place where the force was applied was its extended right arm. Chapter 7:18. Zhang Luan screamed loudly. His blood flow had sped up due to him gathering his energy and exerting his strength. A large open wound suddenly appeared, and his situation turned for the worse. Blood sprayed out from the ruptured part of his flesh and blood. The enormous pain and fear that followed directly smashed his mental defenses. His entire face contorted to the limit, and he even began to tear up. Oh! What terrible execution! As Wright lamented, the giant salamander that had mistakenly struck him wasn't greedy. Its thick and fat body came over horizontally, occupying nearly half the space between the bed and the door. It also blocked between Wright and Luo Nan, becoming a solid barrier. Luo Nan avoided the fatal attack in the nick of time and shook his head under his cloak. Then he looked at the rock wall that the giant salamander had drilled out from. The wall had undergone some renovations, so it could be considered smooth and flat. There weren't any holes that could allow a monster of that size to pass through. There were only a few traces of wetness. It was similar to the wall-passing technique. It was a bidirectional distortion of the giant and the semi-void. No, there should be another ability. It looks like you really are a fleshly body. The level of your ability is quite surprising. Wright was still speaking in a slow and unhurried manner like a boss, but the strength he used to grip Yan Fen's throat had clearly increased. Luo Nan sighed. You've said so much nonsense. This giant salamander of yours is about to breathe its last. I learned in biology class that the tetrodotoxin contained in the salamander is insoluble in water. If you want to spray a poisonous mist, you probably have to use its acidic bodily fluids to neutralize it. It's hard enough to do this over and over again. Biology class? One is never too old to learn. Wright's gaze roamed over Luo Nan's cloak. He didn't linger on this topic, but who knew what he was thinking? 2 seconds later, Wright returned to communication mode. It was as if hypnotizing Zhang Lu and to mount a sneak attack and pouring neurotoxin into the room had never happened. This giant salamander doesn't satisfy me. This is why I don't like the karst caves of Spring City. There are far too few mutants here that are suitable to be controlled. At the beginning of the aberration era, this karst cave was one of the first areas to fall into enemy hands. However, because it attracted the most attention, it was cleaned out early on and became the isolation zone between Spring City and the wilderness. Then, it was filled with people like Zhang Luan. Zhang Luan had already fainted due to massive bleeding, pain, and fear, so he couldn't hear this evaluation. Wright only said it casually, and the focus of the topic quickly jumped to Zhang Luan's wife. Maybe tetrodotoxin is useless to you, but I really want to know, can you stop this lady from absorbing the same toxin? In the previous experiments, my control of the dosage was relatively accurate, but seeing you here, it's too difficult for me to control the dosage in milligrams. Of course, it's not easy to control the power in your hands. On the bed, Yen Fen's face had already turned purple, and she began to convulse due to a severe lack of oxygen. The neurotoxin had already weakened her ability to breathe, and now that lighter was clutching her throat, all of her breathing channels had been cut off. She was about to reach her limit. Luo Nan obviously knew that this was a threat, but he didn't immediately respond. It seemed that he was weighing the pros and cons. Wright maintained his smile. Why don't we get to the bottom of things? Just who are you? What's your relationship with the Xia Luo cult? I haven't seen you in the data, and you don't seem to fit in with this sort of low-level cult that holds a tattered cloak like a treasure. Are you Wu Jun's friend? Lover? Mercenary? Yes. I see injustice on the road, and I draw my blade to help. Is that okay? That's a really annoying answer. Okay, I also feel that there's too much nonsense between us. But right now I hold the initiative. You should answer. What are you going to do? Your mission has failed, and you're still asking me what to do. Luo Nan leaned against the wall to the side of the door and chatted with Wright. He casually said a few words of mockery. You can't get hold of Boss Jun's weakness, and the rebels who cooperated with you have all been annihilated. Aside from grabbing a woman's throat and showing off, what other use do you have? If I were your boss, would certainly deduct your entire year's salary and funds. Then I'd say, don't let me see you again. That would vent my anger. This was an imitation of Zhang Yingying's tone of voice. Though it was usually quite noisy, the effect here was quite decent. The smile on Wright's face remained unchanged, but his eyes grew colder and colder. He was angry. Of course, the more convincing reason was that his preparations in the Abyss region were more or less complete. Hypnotizing Zhang Lu and releasing poison, forcing an awkward conversation. Perhaps Wright really wasn't a combat-type ability user, but his brain was still quite good. He had completed a complex set of multiple layers of cover in this tense atmosphere. He had used this trump card that might have been excessively heavy. Unfortunately, it was still too slow. Luo Nan snapped his fingers. This sort of cliché to the point of explosion still fit his aesthetic standards. However, he had forgotten that he was wearing a disguise glove on his hand. His posturing had failed, so he could only let out a muffled fart on his fingertips. He was extremely embarrassed for a time. Fortunately, he hadn't used the snap of his fingers as a signal. Moreover, he had successfully attracted Wright's attention. Even if it was only for an instant, it was enough to distract Wright. It was at this moment that the long flat tail of the giant salamander, which had been disliked, suddenly swung rapidly from a position close to the ground. It was like a steel blade scraping across the ground. Wright lost his balance amidst the strange sound of flesh and bone being torn apart. His brain hadn't reacted in time. He had partially overlooked this change, so much so that he still had a smile on his face. Then his entire smiling face became crooked due to the tilt of his body. His instinctive reaction surpassed the speed of his thinking in the next moment. Wright's right hand instinctively exerted force, wanting to snap Yen Fen's throat. However, he didn't feel anything at all. He transmitted his thoughts over, but his entire right arm didn't receive the feedback it should have. Wright's eyes weren't enough. His eyes had just dropped to his feet when they slanted to his right arm. Therefore, from the corner of his eye, he glanced at the foot that had been completely dislocated and the ankle that was only left with bone stubble and rotten flesh. The focus of his eyes was an even more bizarre scene. His right arm had been separated from his body from the elbow. There wasn't any blood splashing out, only the instantly decaying flesh and skin structure. It was like mycelium spores that scattered and fluttered in the air. Ah! Amidst his hoarse roar, the right arm that had been separated from his body actually made a slight reaction. It was more like the final spasm of his broken nerves and muscles due to the residual force. It flipped Yanfen's body from a flat position to a sideways position, almost pulling him off the bed. He had enough strength, but he had used it in the wrong direction. Due to the change in his posture, Yanfen's effective field of vision rapidly expanded. He finally saw the intense and bloody scene on the other side of the bed. Very quickly, another ruthless stroke was added to the scene. Wright had lost a leg, and the force exerted on his upper body was also dislocated. Naturally, he lost his balance and fell to the side. He bounced off the edge of the bed and fell to the ground. The giant salamander, which was very close to him, subconsciously swung its tail again. This time, the long, blade-like tail practically cut through the middle of Wright's chest and abdomen. As it cut through his flesh, fat, fascia, and even organs, it also turned his roar into a muffled moan. In the end, Lake didn't say the latter half of his words. He just used his remaining, blood-splattered left hand to forcefully slap the base of the giant salamander's tail. This should be a forceful signal. In the end, a considerable portion of the giant salamander was still under his control. The body of this thick and sturdy monster, which didn't have any vocal organs, trembled, rubbing against the ground as it charged forward. However, a major problem appeared in its coordination. Its originally vigorous pounce became completely inaccurate. It swayed left and right, like a car that had lost control. With a crash, it scraped against the door frame and half the wall as it charged into the living room. Then came the noise of an enormous struggle. The safety of the people lying on the ground in disorder outside was worrying. Wright lay on the ground, looking at this scene in astonishment. Soon, his gaze returned to the shadow of Luo Nan's hood. 2 seconds later, he spoke with a hoarse voice. "How did you do it?" "It's as I said before." Fire God Ant Luo Nan indicated for Wright to shift his gaze to look at the ant-type mutant that was crawling on the ground amidst the bloodstains. These were 2 large ants the size of a thumb. They had just fallen off the giant salamander's body and were crawling towards the group of their own kind. And the number of fire god ants on the giant salamander's body was over 10 times greater. "Fresh delivery. I just got them." Luo Nan swept a glance at Roy One, who was in the shadows in the corner. He revealed a smile that Wright couldn't see. "You control and induce this salamander's instincts and basic thoughts. The fire god ant controls its central nervous system. You make the salamander view me as an enemy, and I use it to perform a set of simple actions. Back and forth. It's very fair." Wright stared blankly at the fire god ant crawling in his bloodstains. "Where's the ant queen?" "You're talking about controlling the ant queen. No matter what, the ant queen is on the mental side. She's also the axis of collective consciousness. It doesn't matter where she is. You just need to control the signal from a remote relay." Controlling the ant queen? Wright discovered that he didn't understand Luo Nan's explanation, but he could feel that it was a matter of course. Controlling a nest of fire god ants. Then I'll observe and experiment. I'll do a few more rounds. That's all. Luo Nan really was a matter of course. On the plane of reality, controlling a nest of mutants and controlling the corresponding population was still a shocking bomb that could blow up the academic world, the inner world, and even the wider domain. Not to mention anything else, just relying on this topic alone was enough to support a large laboratory and publish hundreds of high-quality theses. Then he could rely on citations and honor points to eat for a lifetime. With this kind of experimental foundation, it wasn't strange for him to do anything. Wright's lips and teeth opened and closed. He was barely able to turn his weak breath into speech. There was also a hoarse and strange laughter. "Yes. Yes. You're more professional than me. But you won't be in every domain." His voice had completely broken at the end, but the energy of Wright's entire body was chaotic and restless. It was as if a fire had been ignited in the depths of his bones and muscles. Oh, the abyssal region's configuration was still there. Chapter 719. Wright's own aura was practically overturned. yet the abyssal region's configuration remained unchanged. Clearly, it wasn't based on Wright's will. It was borrowing some sort of external force. But in order to borrow power, one's body needed to have a basic levering power. Wright, who had entered a dying state, had chosen to burn himself. Under the state of flames, the macromolecules that formed the human body would become especially excited. They would decompose into atoms and then rapidly undergo all sorts of chemical reactions. They would be pieced together into carbon dioxide, water vapor, or something else. At the same time, substances with higher melting points and boiling points would be left behind. Of course, Wright wasn't truly burning right now. Or perhaps it could be said that what was burning was not his body, but his soul. Even the virtual brain system had never made a clear definition of the essence of the soul. But from the perspective of a cultivator, their core, which needed to be stable and firm, suddenly underwent a phase change. What it displayed seemed to be no different from the laws of the material world. The soul burned and released heat. Moreover, it reacted with the other components of the surrounding environment to recombine into a new structure. Once a reaction occurred, the result of the reconstruction would be irreversible. Luo Nan watched as Wright's burning soul fused with certain components of the abyssal region storm. Wright's burning soul fused with a completely different form to fill the precise configuration. The precision of this configuration far exceeded the limits of what a B-mental side could control. But after paying the price of burning his soul, the results were immediate. The power of the torrential storm that was stirred up instantly increased by over 5 times. And as the boundary of the burning continued to penetrate inward, Wright lost even more of the essence of his soul. But the power he could control grew stronger and stronger. This sort of burning certainly followed a special rule framework. Only then could the released energy operate in a more effective manner. It didn't scatter and dissipate without any meaning. It was a bit like an altar. Luo Nan subconsciously compared his own altar framework with it. The more he looked, the more similarities there were. This was indeed a configuration system similar to a sacrificial order. It was just that it was more cruel and violent. And judging from Luo Nan's theory of being a tool type and a plant type, it clearly belonged to the latter. Luo Nan quietly leaned against the wall. His gaze penetrated the barrier of the material world to observe the complex state of the abyssal region. The system of this order is huge. It has a developed root system that covers a wide area through the abyssal region. However, it obviously has a more complicated hierarchy and even authority settings. Wright shouldn't belong to the upper echelons of the system because the power he borrows only comes from the tip of the root system. Or perhaps it's just the humus soil that's affected by the roots and fallen leaves. Hey, no matter what, Wright was still a B-rank psychic. Regardless of which organization he was in, he should be in the middle or upper echelons. If even he was only in the periphery, then wouldn't the core strength of this order be at the top? Luo Nan's eyes blinked a few times. It was at this moment that Wright raised his blood-stained left hand. The color of the blood and the wound on the skin of his palm that had just been torn apart rapidly formed a distorted and deformed figure. The power of chi and blood and the storm of the abyss area converged at the center of the palm. The air pressure in the room was clearly rising rapidly. Due to the uneven distribution between the areas, an invisible whirlpool was formed. Since it was already like this in the real world, the storm in the abyss zone became even more agitated. The mental side, or at least the mental side below the level of an extraordinary, would find it several times more difficult to temporarily construct a structure in such an environment. In other words, Luo Nan had lost the initiative on the level of combat. Wright's lips parted to reveal a warped smile. The pain of having his stomach split open made him lose interest in talking. He was already impatient to reap the pleasure of an extreme counterattack. Die. Luo Nan furrowed his brows. He noticed that there was another indescribable active behind Wright's bloodshot and turbid eyes. It was slowly opening amidst the torrential storm of the abyss zone. There was a bit of error in his previous judgment. The order system that Wright belonged to still possessed a flexible method of setting up the level of authority. Perhaps Wright was only able to use the humus soil in the beginning, but as the level of the sacrifice increased, so much so that the influence of the event itself could still touch the main body of the root system, to continue increasing its power. At this very moment, that bewitching eye was releasing light and absorbing light. It stirred the abyss zone and reorganized information within the chaotic storm in order to understand the various changes in the state of affairs of this side of the world. This was also a process of awakening, of authority. The greater the matter, the greater the effort. Luo Nan sighed in response to this. Tonight has already been full of accidents. Now that a big guy has jumped in, it's really hard to clean things up. It's best if we don't meet for now. What the hell are you talking about? Wright's words were squeezed out from between his teeth. Luo Nan's incomprehensible words and the casual attitude he displayed were far more painful than the lacerations on his hands and feet and the wounds on his chest and abdomen. His current sorry appearance made it impossible for him to assume a calm posture. He could only use even more violent methods to wash away the humiliation of his crushing defeat and heavy injuries. His lips opened and closed as he chanted the incantation of sacrifice. The secret sound resonated with the mental and material planes to hypnotize his own body. He did his best to match the gradually awakening level of power in the abyss zone. Then he used his broken fleshly body as a guide, disregarding the consequences, to form the most lethal attack. Wright's voice rose, the eye of all souls that pierces through the heavens. There was a sudden click in the air. It was as if an invisible finger had turned off an invisible air switch. At the same time, the abyss zone's sacrificial configuration was like a slanted fort piled up by children on a beach. It didn't even have to endure the frontal impact of the waves. It collapsed with a rumble because of a small vibration. The abyss zone's slowly opened eye of all souls was like a sand painting. It warped beyond recognition in the blink of an eye. Wright's eyes widened, but soon, the fragile water crystals exploded from the recoil force. The powerful force that the abyss zone had just gathered then collapsed mercilessly devoured him. The humus of the order was originally on the periphery, so it didn't matter if it received the attack. However, Wright, who was close at hand, seemed to have a bomb placed in his skull and his internal organs. Blood sprayed out from his 7 orifices at the same time, especially his eyeballs. His already cracked chest and abdomen sprayed out a mist of blood and pieces of internal organs. They were spun by the vortex of air, covering most of the room. As for Wright himself, he was a bloody mess. It was hard to call him human. It was also at this moment that Yen Fun, who was on the bed, obtained strength from who knows where. She used her hoarse voice to let out a shout filled with delight. Luo Nan shot a glance in that direction. Actually, he himself was within the range of the blood that sprayed out. However, he couldn't care about these details at this time. He slowly walked forward amidst the chaotic vortex of air that had lost its order. He walked to Wright's side, who was already breathing more than he was breathing. Though Wright's sacrificial configuration was destroyed, Luo Nan wasn't happy to see the chaotic storm that surged and devoured him on the level of the abyss zone. People needed to finish what they started. Luo Nan didn't forget that the surroundings of Spring City were filled with the hounds of Quantum Corporation. This group of people were all nervous. If by any chance the other side really did follow the trail, then it would become a seesaw. They would push down one end and raise the other end. They clearly wanted to help, but they would give the other side even more trouble. I need to clear the channel. Luo Nan needed to promptly release the flood before the turbulent storm of the abyss zone broke through the threshold of alertness. It would be best if he could erase all traces. Of course, this was much more difficult than destruction. It was like kicking away several thousand building blocks that had already been constructed into a castle. Then, the building blocks would follow the order they were arranged in before they were sealed, falling neatly back into the box. Let right return to right, and let evil eye return to evil eye. Everything would be like it had never happened. 4 months ago, Luo Nan could forget about doing this even if he squeezed out all of his brain juice. Luckily, Luo Nan had been facing the cloud labyrinth for the past few months, which was far more complicated than the situation before his eyes. In that harsh environment, it was like building blocks or a jigsaw puzzle. He tried to reassemble the billions of pieces of the structure and form a complete logic. This was the repeated strengthening of the basic concept of configuration construction. Luo Nan categorized the configuration fragments into different categories. He used the theory of the virtual brain system as a benchmark to sort them out one by one. From the most basic number, size, weight, and height, it gradually rose to the balance and symmetry between the various parts. It even reached the structural relationship between the parts and the whole. Aside from theory, there was also practice. Just the priority of interference control was like calligraphy. The use of the brush, the structure, the technique of composition, and the technique of ink were all carefully divided. They could be divided into several dozen major and minor items. All of them needed to be diligently practiced and corrected from time to time. Luo Nan's accumulation of soul strength was vigorous and peerless. Otherwise, with the intensity of his practice, just the enormous consumption and the backlash from the shattering of the configuration would be enough to kill a normal ability user 1,000 times over. With such a rich reserve of experience, Luo Nan looked at Wright's crude method of construction once more. He really had a wonderful sense of superiority, like a reborn elementary school student. Not to mention the fact that he had just witnessed the entire process of the sacrificial configuration from nothing to something. It was built step by step. It was tantamount to having a standard answer first. All that was left was to test his memory. Even if he didn't, he would be able to see the shattered configuration fragments. He would be able to complete the dismantling and restoration work according to the laws and principles of the virtual brain system. He could also explore the rationality of the details in passing. The work was completed 3 seconds later. The air vortex formed by the imbalance of air pressure within the room was smoothed out. The fluttering cloak calmed down as well. It streaked across Wright's body and face, making his body appear faintly discernible under the lights of the room. Light and shadow instantly intersected, and a visible change occurred to Wright's ruined body. His twisted and shattered body suddenly became orderly. Even though his limbs were still incomplete, his figure could already be clearly discerned. Even the blood, flesh, and internal organ fragments that filled the air were gathered and pieced together by incorporeal hands. They were reassembled. At least on the surface, they were reassembled. This was like a bloody and splendid magic trick. In fact, the mutual interference between the mental and material planes was like a magic designed by the creator. Chapter 720. Luo Nan could more or less understand the reason for Yan Fan's shocked and pale expression. After all, this sort of phenomenon, similar to the reversal of time and space, was quite frightening from a visual perspective. But it was a pity that this was only an illusion. This relatively complete body was merely a temporary carrier to collect Wright's chaotic collapse of energy. The complex and precise functions of the human body were ultimately not building blocks. It was impossible for Luo Nan to bestow a new life force to the already shattered cellular tissues. This already exceeded the limits of the domain that his soul strength could reach. At most, he could only give Yan Fan and even Wright the illusion that he was mostly mistaken. And it was precisely this tiny domain constructed from this illusion that still allowed the flow of consciousness and cognition. It even allowed the body to make the tiniest of minute reactions. Within this tiniest of minute limits, Wright's remnant consciousness and his incomplete body blended together. It was like a spark beneath a whirlwind of ashes. Though it was tiny, it was still bright. Wright miraculously retained a single breath. This also allowed him to personally experience the marvelous taste of his body disintegrating and reassembling, of his soul burning and reassembling. This was truly the life and death of a person. It followed a majestic and powerful will. It suddenly died and suddenly existed, treading back and forth on the boundary between life and death. And all of this was led by the furnace before his eyes. No, it was the master. He did his best to widen his eyes. The dim light of the outside world penetrated through the shattered and reassembled crystal. It spurred on the cone cells and a series of subsequent nerve reflexes, combining the fuzzy information of the outside world with the imaginary illusions in his brain. It made this demon, who was already destined to die, let out the most pious sigh of his entire life. "Oh God." The temporarily reassembled soul was annihilated. The reformed body collapsed and dissolved like a pile of mud. It also completely digested the impact force of the abyssal storm, turning the intense turbulence of the abyssal plane into nothingness. This was undoubtedly an extremely cruel way to die. But before Wright completely disintegrated, his vocal cords vibrated. A weak force pushed through the layers of conduction in the air molecules, transmitting the sigh that was rich with emotions in time. Though the range of influence didn't even exceed a diameter of 3 meters, it was already enough for Luo Nan and Yen Fun to hear it. Was this a god? A certain someone's requirements were really low. Luo Nan shook his head slightly. He wasn't as ignorant as Wright. The virtual brain system involved configuration, dynamo core, and all sorts of other deep theories. Luo Nan still didn't fully understand them. He stumbled and stumbled when putting them into practice. He could only advance at a tortoise speed within the labyrinth of clouds and mist. And from his perspective of experience, it was just a brilliant sunwheel within an abyss. The might that came from the endless void was immeasurable. With such a comparison, if he were a god, the power system of this universe would probably collapse immediately. In the end, it was just an overly delusional delusion of an ignorant person. This was what Luo Nan thought, but Yen Fun, who was lying on the bed, quivered and her entire face swelled red. At that moment, she was still under the influence of the nerve agent. Her limbs were numb, and it was difficult for her to control them. She could only barely move her vocal cords to spell out 2 words between hiccups and chuckles. Luckily, Luo Nan's ears were good. After Yen Fun repeated it several times, he was finally able to make out the words clearly. Cloak, cloak. Hey, a cloak is different from a cloak. Of course, Luo Nan knew that what Yen Fun said wasn't the literal meaning, but now wasn't the time to get to the bottom of it. From his perspective, finding the right nerve agent treatment method and antidote was more difficult than anything he had done before. His gaze turned to the door of the damaged room. There, the Vulcan ant was controlling the giant salamander to stagger back. Treat a dead horse as if it were alive. No, the one who started the trouble needs to untie it. Whether or not tonight's matter would have a good ending would depend on whether or not this old saying filled with empiricism would be useful. Reality proved that Luo Nan's luck wasn't bad. It was just as Dead Ghost Wright had said. He didn't add too much nerve agent to Yen Fun. Yen Fun herself had a rather powerful fleshly body. Her bodily functions were much stronger than a normal person's. After stopping the continuous injection of the nerve agent, Luo Nan assisted her in combing her neural network, and she slowly recovered. When she was barely able to move, Yen Fun struggled to get down to the ground. She practically threw herself at Luo Nan's feet. She didn't care about the filth and bloodstains on the ground. She gave a heavy kowtow. There weren't any words of thanks coming out of her mouth. Instead, she piously kissed the corner of Luo Nan's cloak. Was this a custom of some vagrant tribe or their Xia Luo cult? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Perhaps it could be said that Luo Nan maintained the principle of acting cool. Luo Nan resisted his instinct to avoid it and accepted it. Yen Fun gave another kowtow after completing the ceremony. Then she staggered to her feet. She practically used her hands and feet to arrive at a corner of the room. Zhang Luwen, who had fallen into a semi-conscious state due to massive blood loss, lay there. Yen Fun didn't say a word from beginning to end. She just used her trembling hands to feel around Zhang Luwen's body. Soon, she pulled out a dagger from the leather sheath at Zhang Luwen's waist. This should be the weapon that Zhang Luwen normally used. He didn't have the time to use it when he attacked Luo Nan, but now Yen Fun had it in her hands. Without any hesitation, Yen Fun stabbed the dagger straight into Zhang Luwen's perfectly fine left shoulder socket. Luo Nan's eyebrows jumped when he saw this, but he didn't seem to have the qualifications to say anything since his feet were a bloody mess. Zhang Luwen woke up from the pain and screamed loudly. But when his eyes reflected the pale and distorted face of his wife, It was as if his throat had been cut open. Only the hissing sound of air leaking could be heard for a time. Yen Fen pressed the weight of her entire body onto the dagger. The edge of the dagger had long since pierced through Zhang Lu's shoulder socket, stabbing into the ground below. She was very close to Zhang Lu and her husband. She was practically speaking right next to their ears. Tell me. Why did you do this? Hiss. Let go. Let go. Zhang Lu finally remembered to speak, but he begged for mercy from the torment of the pain. His thick and sturdy body spasmed and twitched as he rubbed against the ground. Tell me why. Yen Fen's voice was weak. It was as if she could lose her voice at any time. But the enormous tension of her emotions bombarded Zhang Lu's heart with the piercing edge of the dagger. Zhang Lu wriggled and struggled on the ground to no avail. He could only scream with all his might, the Xielua order is about to be finished. I told you before. Right is a member of the Amaterasu order. The Amaterasu order. The strongest of the three great orders. There's no hope for us if we're targeted by them. No hope. The breath in Yen Fen's throat trembled. It was hard to tell whether she was crying or laughing. There's no hope for us if we're targeted. You want to sell everyone? Weren't you the ones who insisted on putting on airs? Blood gushed out of Zhang Lu's shoulder like a fountain. Blood flowed endlessly from his severed arm as well. His willpower had almost completely collapsed. Tears and snot flowed from the dignified and imposing man's eyes. He was in so much pain that he couldn't even reply for a time. Yen Fen didn't need to reply either. She was just venting her emotions. It's you. You used the survival of the tribe as an excuse to push Wu Jun to the top. She's not a member of the tribe. She's just a postgraduate student stranded in the wilderness. She's still pregnant. She was about to return to the city to give Polio a better environment. It's you. You forced her to the top. It's because of the cloak, right? Because she's the only operator in the base who has mastered this technique. Once again, Yen Fen twisted the dagger in her hand. Zhang Lu screamed even louder. His waist and legs twisted, he tried desperately to shake Yen Fen off, but it was all in vain. In the end, he just gave up and shouted. So what? She should have given me the cloak long ago. Give it to you? Didn't she want to return to the city? After returning to Spring City, she could have left if she wanted to, but she refused to let go of the position. Those stubborn idiots really treated her like a priest. Fine, even if she was a priest, what did she do? All she did was enchantment. 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 These childish tricks might have been useful in the wilderness, but they're in a big city now. There are so many powerful people in the government, the military, the association, and the church. Enchantment is useless. Give me power, power. Zhang Lu's face was purple, and his veins were bulging. He screamed at the top of his lungs, since she's a priest, isn't it reasonable for her to give power to her believers? If she can't even do that, how can she start a religion? How can she call herself a god? Yen Fen screamed back, we never did that. However, Zhang Lu was purely venting at this time. He only roared in his own logic, that bullsh *t, cloak, is simply the nonsense of a crazy old man. Only those stubborn fools would worship it as if it were a god and promote it wantonly. Now, the Amaterasu sect is here. They asked for it, and they got it. Why should I die with them? Of course, I have to sell it for a good price. Yen Fen stared at the man beneath her. She stared at her husband and squeezed out the words through her teeth, you're shameless. Only a useless god is shameless. Zhang Lu pushed his head back. He didn't even care about the wound on his shoulder as he scolded, useless, unqualified. Compared to a real church, you're just trash that can't do anything. It's trash like this that has delayed me for so many years. My talent and youth have been ruined by this trash, and I still have to struggle in the cave like a worm. To hell with the cloak, to hell with the loyalty. Ugh. His voice suddenly changed tone, mixing with the sound of his throat, skin, fascia, and bones being cut open. Yen-Fen pulled out her knife and slit her husband's throat. The airflow and gurgling blood drained the last bit of Zhang Lu An's vitality and ambition. At the same time, she used up the last bit of her strength. Chapter 721. From 6 to 7 o'clock a.m., the simulated sky lighting was adjusted to its brightness. With the support of electricity, the ventilation system sent a cool breeze that brushed against the child's face. The slight light and touch triggered Polio's biological clock. He blinked and woke up from his sleep. His face was wrinkled. The warm and hard metal arm had left a few marks on his face, and it was bumpy to the touch. His neck wasn't comfortable either. Aya, how did I sleep last night? The grogginess from waking up couldn't subside. Polio felt that his head was swaying left and right, and he was going to fall down at any moment. Should I sleep for a while? Oh, it's better not to. I seem to have forgotten something, and it's a terrible memory. He rubbed his eyes with his left hand and rummaged through his blurry memory. The room door knocked twice before it was pushed open. Polio, today's breakfast is egg porridge. Wash up quickly before it gets cold. Oh, I understand, Aunt Fun. Polio shook his head and propped himself up from the floor. His memory surfaced. His mother was away, and Aunt Fun delivered breakfast every morning. It was mealtime, and then, Aunt Fun. Polio jumped up and chased after her. Yen Fun turned around and caught Polio, who was like a cannonball. After physical contact, the ridiculous distance between the dream and reality was bridged. Polio's heart was pounding, and he lifted his head nervously to size up Fun. In his eyes, Aunt Fun's face was still fine, but there was an obvious strangulation mark on her neck, and her complexion was also very pale. These details shattered the illusion of a peaceful daily life, and made everything in the surroundings quickly become real. Polio remembered the previous night, the submarine escape, the accident, and Mr. Furnace. He wept beside Furnace, the magical charging, and his confession. All sorts of scenes flashed past his mind, and he linked them together. It was supposed to be a prelude to a battle. Polio was prepared to fight, but, Aunt Fun, did you see Mr. Furnace? Yen Fun smiled and gave Polio a peck on his cheek. Then, she placed her cheek behind his head and said softly, "Of course, I saw him. Thanks to your help, I didn't delay your breakfast." "Don't play it down." Polio grumbled loudly. He could smell the scent of blood and medicine on Aunt Fun's body. Her injuries weren't light. Yen Fun smiled and looked at Polio as she said, "Aya, I'm sorry, but that's the truth." Polio looked down on the behavior of treating him like a child, but he couldn't do anything to Aunt Fun. He could only compromise and ask, "Where's Mr. Furnace?" Mr. Smelter had something to do and left first. He also drove the off-road vehicle in the exhibition hall. Sheng Hui, 28 points. Polio remembered that the off-road vehicle was a souvenir assembled by his mother. Though it was priced, it wasn't for export. Oh, Mr. Furnace mentioned it last night. But what does 28 points mean? I might as well just drive away. Polio felt that the logic of an adult was ridiculous. It diluted his focus on the series of unknown events last night. Yen Fun used other factors to distract him. "Before leaving, Mr. Furnace gave you a gift and asked me to pass it to you. It's a pity that it's too big, so I can't carry it up. You'll have to go down and take a look." Polio went downstairs in a daze and arrived at the exhibition hall. The powerful and domineering hand-assembled off-road vehicles were no longer there, but the shop didn't feel empty because there was a large number of hand-assembled off-road vehicles. Another gigantic fellow occupied the original spot. It was a thick reptile with 4 limbs and a long tail. Its head and neck were one and the same. Its grayish-black skin looked smooth and seemed to be wrapped in a layer of water film. There were yellowish-green round spots and protrusions on its skin. The color contrast was very strong. Is this a salamander? It's so big. Polio recognized the commonly seen amphibian in the karst cave. Its body was too big. Its head and body were about 2 meters long, and its flat tail was about the same length as the rest of its body. It was a huge creature that was about 4 meters long. With Polio's small body, he wouldn't be visible even if he was swallowed. Yen Fen confirmed, it's a giant salamander. It's a mutant that lives in the karst cave waterway. Is this the gift? Mr. Lava is a beast tamer? Polio didn't dare to believe it. This large creature exceeded his expectations and understanding of gifts. He didn't care about what happened last night. He widened his eyes and sized up the giant salamander. He wanted to touch it, but Yen Fen stopped him. This creature has a bad temper. Your small arms and legs won't be able to touch it. Wear this. As she spoke, Yen Fen placed a translucent leather ring and metal bracelet on the wrist of Polio's mechanical right arm. Though the combination of the leather band and metal was strange, the size of the bracelet was made according to the interface of the mechanical arm. It fitted perfectly and didn't affect the functions of the mechanical arm. Polio sized up the new accessory curiously and discovered a small creature crawling inside the translucent leather band. It was a fiery red ant, a real living creature. It was crawling in the hollow tunnel of the leather band. Polio didn't know how it was sealed in. It was interesting, but it was also confusing. Put in your thoughts. That's what Mr. Furness said. Yen Fen's tone was rhythmic as though she was reciting a poem. Though we have to work hard to operate the mechanical arm without electricity, we can start from the basics. With her voice and Polio's focused gaze, the ants crawling in the leather bracelet seemed to have received a signal, and their movement stopped. At the exhibition platform, the giant salamander, who was lying lazily on the ground, suddenly lifted its head and twisted its body. Its bulging eyeballs rotated as it looked in the direction of Polio and Polio. Polio and Polio stared at each other. Polio held his breath and exclaimed, "Wah!" Using the chain configuration to link the individual brainwaves with the sensory organs of a single Vulcan ant. Then, through the condensation ring's global sensor network, it will connect with the Vulcan ant population. Simplified operating instructions and related interfaces have been added in the middle. It can partially realize intelligent operation, allowing idiots to operate. There are no problems with the basic idea, but it takes up a bit more resources and harasses the manipulator behind the scenes. After all, it's not like watching a child. I can optimize it further in the future. Luo Nan's brain operated at high speeds. He went over the design model of the present that Midnight had drafted in his mind once more to make sure that there were no obstructions. And from the feedback from the sensor network, Polio was having a lot of fun. Everyone was to their liking. Everything was perfect. Of course, this was just an embellishment after a series of tense events. It was a way of taking care of the cute little fellow. What Luo Nan truly needed to pay attention to was the entire plot thread he discovered last night. The Order of Justice and the Eye of Secret Contract were listed as one of the 3 great secret orders of the Amaterasu Order. Why would they be interested in the so-called holy relic of the Pheasant Order, something that even their own believers looked down upon? If this piece of information were to be sold, it would be enough for the various intelligence teams to give out month-end incentives. But what Luo Nan paid the most attention to in this entire thread was: Luo Nan, are you seriously listening to Teacher Lee's words? Huh? Luo Nan shuddered. Only now did he come back to his senses. He noticed the people around him and the place they were in. Mrs. Luo Shuqing's gaze was stern. Her expression was furious as she sat on the sofa in the advisor's office. 2 meters away was the master of this office, Acumen College's dedicated advisor for the 10th grade, Mr. Li Mingda. Luo Nan himself stood across from the coffee table with the identity of a student who had committed a crime, receiving an education. However, his mind had been wandering outside the heavens just now. Old Immortal Mingda's words didn't even enter his ears. They were blocked out cleanly. It's fine. It's fine. A young man's mind is quick-witted. His imagination is rich. A moment of distraction is nothing. And I understand student Luo Nan's personality. I'm worried that he's overthinking things. Li Mingde gently twirled the grizzled beard beneath his chin. This retro style suited his appearance quite well. It really did give him the air of a sage. If the cold sweat on his forehead was a bit less, then it would be even more perfect. Luo Shuqing bowed once more to express her apology. Teacher Li, Luo Nan has really caused you trouble during this time. Li Mingde chuckled. He was just about to continue the previous topic when Luo Nan's gaze shot over. The back of his neck turned slightly cold and he shook his head vigorously on the spot. No, no, no. This child, Luo Nan, is publicly acknowledged by our Academic Affairs Division. He's smart and precocious. He's quite different from ordinary children. This is a factor of his personality and IQ. It has nothing to do with how he conducts himself. You see, he doesn't have many friends in his age group. But he has a lot in common with his upperclassmen and the elites outside the school. Hee, that scoundrel Xie Junping has given him quite a few rotten ideas. Hu Huaying comes over every day to clean up his mess. The second generation of the construction society gnashes their teeth in anger at the mention of him. The Mystic Arts Research Society is directly surrounded by him. He brings bodyguards to the school and he openly flirts with society girls. All of you parents really don't know. Hiss. Li Mingde's hand exerted strength and broke 2 strands of his beard. His lower jaw and heart twitched twice, but in the end, he maintained the demeanor of a teacher. Mrs. Luo, we can't use ordinary eyes to look at special talents. Student Luo Nan has participated in many activities in this school year. He has also obtained outstanding results. Actually, this is something that the school and us teachers are happy to see. Luo Shuqing revealed a courteous and dignified smile to conceal her awkward and complex emotions. Perhaps Li Mingde saw through it, or perhaps he was completely indifferent. He just continued to speak according to the established plan, but in today's era of authority, one accepts the convenience of intelligence and also bears the restrictions of intelligence. In this way, some rules that are very suitable for ordinary people are used to treat geniuses. That's right, it's a student with extraordinary talent like Luo Nan. These rules often appear rigid and unreasonable. The school also hopes to find a plan that satisfies both sides. Student Luo Nan's special talent will be preserved to the greatest degree while finding a suitable and compliant space for him. Therefore, we discussed for a bit. Perhaps Mrs. Luo, as his guardian, can be flexible and jump out of the boundaries of linear thinking. Luo Shuqing took a deep breath. What do you mean? You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.